Is the camera good?
Yep.
Okay, because I moved it like twice.
All right, we are live at my home at the Vine for this week's Torah portion. Good to have everybody here. If you're joining us and you don't know where we're beginning, we're going to be in Deuteronomy today. Make sure this mic's on. Yep. Before I go any further. Yep, that mic's on. Okay, good. We're going to be in Deuteronomy chapter 21, beginning in verse 10, reading through to chapter 25, verse 19. Then we'll be in Isaiah and Matthew later, but we'll say that when we get there, so it won't confuse you. So, anyway, Jonathan, if you'll start us off with some prayer, brother.
Yeah, we'll do. Joe, thank you so much for being awesome, for being amazing, for being our Father that we can call on in our time of need, and you're our ever-present help. So I just thank you for who you are, who you continue to be in our lives. Thank you for your word, the word that you've given us to learn, study, and to model our life after, and to get closer to you by following your instructions and your ways. So I thank you for all that you've done in our lives, all you continue to do, meeting all of our needs and even some of our wants. Praise in your Son's holy name, Yeshua. Amen.
Amen. All right, so I'm going to start us off in reading 21 in verse 10. It says, when you go out to fight against your enemies, and Yahuwah, your Elohim, shall give them into your hand, and you shall take them captive, and shall see among the captives a woman fair of form, and shall delight in her, and take her for your wife. Then you shall bring her home to your house, and she shall shave her head, and trim her nails, and put aside the mantle of her captivity, and shall dwell in your house, and mourn her father and her mother a month of days. And after that you shall go in to her and her husband, and be her husband, and she shall be your wife. And it shall be, if you are not pleased with her, then you shall let her go at her desire, but you do not sell her at all for silver. Do not treat her harshly, since you have humbled her. Verse 15 says, when a man has two wives, one loved and the other unloved, and they have borne him children, both the loved and the unloved, and the firstborn son is of her who is unloved. Then it shall be on the day he makes his sons to inherit his possessions, he is not allowed to treat the son of the beloved wife as firstborn in the face of the son of the unloved, who is truly the firstborn. But he is to acknowledge the son of the unloved wife as the firstborn by giving him a double portion of all that he has, for he is the beginning of his strength. The right of his firstborn is his. 18 says, when a man has a wayward and rebellious son who is not listening to the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and who, when they have disciplined him, does not listen to them, then his father and his mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of the city, to the gate of his city. And they shall say to the elders of the city, the son of ours is wayward and rebellious. He is not listening to our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of his city shall stone him to death with stones. Thus you shall purge the evil from your midst, and let all of Israel hear and fear. And when a man has committed a sin worthy of death, then he shall be put to death, and you shall hang him on a tree. Let his body not remain overnight on the tree, for you shall certainly bury him the same day. For he who is hanged is accursed of Elohim, so that you do not defile the land which Jehovah your Elohim is giving you as an inheritance. All right.
Well, I had a question,
Sure.
or a statement, I guess, more of a statement, on verse 14. Verse 14 at the very end, mine reads different, and it's when I say attitude, this. Let me just read it from the beginning of 14, how mine read. It says, but if you no longer delight in her, you shall let her go where she wants. But you shall not sell her for money, nor shall you treat her as a slave, since you have humiliated her.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was interesting where the slave, and since you have humiliated her. Yours doesn't read that way, and having that added piece, I feel like changes up the sentence.
Yeah, no, I kind of see that too. I think it's like a state of being. So it's how she would then carry herself in society, how she would look and people would interact with her. And she's a literal prisoner of war, essentially. But the way he's bringing her in is out of like his good graces, she was pretty, whatever the scenario was that made him think, you know what, instead of just casting you off and letting you deal with the aftermath, let me bring you home, bring you to our people, and you can learn our ways and our customs. And if you don't want that, if you don't like that, why don't you just go ahead and head out? Like, don't make this anything awkward and say like, well, since you're my property, now I'm going to sell you as a slave. Now I'm going to try to get something out of it. Hey, I brought you in when I could have just left you, but you got here. You don't like Yahweh. You don't like our ways, our customs. You'd rather be somewhere else. This isn't going to work for us anyway. So I'm just going to kind of let you leave. And it's like, I think it's what it's saying. It's like, let it be like a graceful moment. Let it be something where it's, and all the negativity surrounding it, don't also then humiliate her after that. Don't turn her into a property. She's not property. She was something that you were trying to bring in. Like, essentially, she's going to be grafted in. She's going to be part of the family. But if she's not going to do it. And then we kind of see that same mentality as with the rebellious son. If he doesn't want to be in the family, he doesn't want to be the son, it says, allow him to be cast out. Don't just keep him around. If it's going to be a problem, it's going to be a problem. Hey, just go ahead and head out. Figure out life for yourself. Hopefully you return back to the Father. Hopefully the things she learns that she picked up, maybe she returns one day. But then instead of causing all this strife and turmoil, just go ahead and head out. But I'm not going to sell you. I'm not going to treat you less than. You're a whole human. You're a whole adult. Just go do something else. It's my opinion. Yeah. Hey, go ahead, Ms. Griswold.
I think it says a lot about where we've come as a society, right? Bear in mind that, during the time period that, this was coming out via the Torah, this was radical. Because in every other society, women were treated as basically as chattel, right? As property. And, normally in battle, as we saw after the whole situation with Midianite women, right? If they had been with a man, obviously they were devalued, right? Virgins were prized, and therefore, we saw the virgins being spared, and of course the women that had been with a man because of the whole Midianite affair, the whole Balaam thing, or Balaam, they were the ones that were killed, right? It wasn't uncommon, was an instruction from God or whatever to basically kill everybody and everything, that obviously the women would have been included in that, right? So for a woman to be spared, even if for these reasons, right, would be considered better than basically just killing her, right? At least she was able to live and she was given a place in society, and not just as some slave girl, but as a wife, right? A rightful wife, and with all of the entitlements that a wife would have in Jewish society versus a non-Jewish society where she's basically just being treated like chattel. So, it seems so barbaric to us, but I guess, it's always better to take things in context of the times that they were in. Maybe look at some other historical documents about other societies that were their contemporaries to see how they treated their women. The cutting of her nails. I guess, long nails are popular right now. I don't know. But it's just something to cause him to have to think, mourning for her parents, her family, whoever might have been left behind, or sold, or killed, or whatever. Make this guy really think, is this really what I want to do? So, anyway, just food for thought when taking into context of these hard sayings sometimes in the Torah.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I think one of the things we see too, right after that, is it talks about something. I almost want to pose it as a question. It says if a man has two wives, the one loved and the other unloved. So it's almost giving you the option and the potential stipulation that in a marriage, you could not be in love, but yet still be in covenant marriage. And it's a kind of an awkward thing to think about or to say. especially when we read like Song of Solomon and different things of like, or the different beautiful messages throughout Scripture. Here it's given a scenario where it's like, yeah, you may have taken someone in, and they may not be your, I'm using air quotes for everybody can't see, your love, but you can still provide for them, take care of them, support them, do everything you would do for a wife without having to be super duper lovey-dovey. But it goes on to say, really, what it's all about is it's about the children. And I think that's a scenario that's really important to me. It's very pertinent in my life. Is hey, whatever scenario you're in, it's like don't let one of the children suffer because of that, right? If it's her fault or his fault, or for whatever reason there's not love in the scenario, don't let one of the children be left out. Don't let one of them. I was to say, but he shall acknowledge the firstborn son of the unloved by giving him a double portion. So it's saying, regardless of what the two adults deal with and their internal strife and struggles, the kids are the ones that are going to be the ones who are affected the most. So make sure that they're not in harm's way. Make sure they're not in the path of the bullets, or I guess back then they would have had arrows. I don't know, the stones that they would have been throwing back and forth at each other. Thoughts, Ms. Kristen?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And again, even today, not all Jews, but many Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox Jews practice arranged marriages. Sometimes even like from the age of a kid, you're introduced to, oh yeah, this is going to be a future president. He's like 5 or something, It so happens. And oftentimes it's, families that have known each other for generations, right? So you kind of have a ready-built network to support you through life, right? When you have those kids, you've got instant babysitters, right? You've got the village already, so to speak, right? And a very intentional village, one that's, that shares your values and your culture. So you know what you're getting, you know what I mean? So, and it's very much like that in Uganda and Africa, where my husband comes from. It's, I'm sure they probably do have some arranged marriages, but it's not uncommon for people to intermarry amongst families because, again, you've got that support system for one another. And, they don't have daycares every day on the street, so you have to take that in consideration when producing children because somebody's got to work and somebody's got to take care of kids, and it's challenging, right? Keeping a home and just the whole 9 yards. God forbid you have like a farm or something where it requires a lot of time and labor. So as for the second or the first and second wife, the example of Yaakov, Jacob with his 2 wives, or actually ends up with 4 wives, is a perfect example, right? Even with Isaac, right? All the sons, these initial sons of Abraham, were planned wives, so to speak, right? The only difference is that Yaakov actually really loved, Rachel, right? But it's more about, is this a good fit for the long term in life versus what I want right now? Right, how she looks or how she behaves or what family she comes from, right, as far as her social status. But I think it's difficult for us to grasp these days. Again, it's all in context, but I think sometimes we almost need a little bit of that in today's society because like you rightly pointed out, we have a tendency to fall in love and fall out of love, right? And then when all of the love is gone, then we just divorce. And I'm not saying that divorce doesn't happen within the Jewish community. It does. Sometimes a lot, depending on, their values and standards. But it's something where they're just as much as you go through premarital counseling. It's almost like they have pre-divorce counseling, like to really think through, especially when there's children involved. So it has to be really well thought out, a calculated effort, and something really serious before people get divorced in that society. So I think it's, these are life lessons that would be really helpful for us, and maybe would cause less separation of families,
Amen.
Anybody if they're online, anything to say?
Anything before we move over to 22?
right, so then super quick, obviously we should all at least have some idea. If not, now we're going to acknowledge 22 and 23, really cool verse, talking about the curse of the man hung on a tree. I think we know, or maybe have an understanding of what that might be referring to. And it also says that you shall bury him on the same day. So we're talking about within the time frame of day, whenever we know the day starts, sometime before that day is over, that person should be buried. So I just think that was a very interesting, it's because it's such a small little section, 22 and 23, but it says a lot.
Oh, yeah. Why does it say a lot to you, Jonathan?
I don't know. What do you think?
Bounced it back, Eric. Well, to me, the obvious part is going to be Yeshua in the time of his death, being on a tree, and the fact that he was buried the same day. I think this is a fulfilling of the Torah that day of his crucifixion. So that's, for me, what stands out the most in this.
Mm-hmm.
On top of this being a command, not only for what was going to take place, 2,000 years later or so, but for what they're to live out in the daily life always.
Right.
Period.
Well, yeah, and like that section right above it, that 18 through 21, it's talking about purge the evil from your midst. It didn't say kill them; it says purge it, get it out of there, right? If you're going to be a problem, if you're going to be an issue, just take you and your problem somewhere else. Now, 22 and 23 is saying, but if that crime is worthy of death, this is how you do that. So it's pretty much, a lot of times we read like, oh, in the past it was just so barbaric. You did one thing wrong, hit you in the head with a rock. And you're like, no. I mean, there was definitely some levels before you got there. There were some crimes that were immediately capital punishment. There were some that like, hey, we're going to lead up to that point of like, well, we tried to purge you, but now you're doing something that we can't. We can't just send you away for this. This needs a literal punishment. So if you have to go that route, then this is how you do go about it. So it's, I like that it's like at the end, it's kind of like if you have to. Please, nobody ever do this. But if you do, this is how you go about it. And I think that it's a wise way for us to kind of deal with our community and our church, people around us. Is if something really is a problem, a detriment, like the rebellious son as an example, hey, just send them out. Hey, you know what? You're not really fitting in with the body. We're all moving in one direction.
Yeah. We'd
love for you to join us. We'd love to counsel you. We'd love to help you, to grow you, to show you, maybe the error of your ways, for you to explain to us why you're in this situation, so we can be, real. We don't want to just say, oh, I saw you sin one time, get out of here.
Right.
But at the same time, if it's never going to happen, or if it's going to cause harm to the body as a whole, it's better just to remove that piece than to ruin the whole body.
I agree.
And we see that example over and over again, where like 22 and 23 is like, okay, now you've stepped past the ability for us to kind of interact and to help. We, this is a crime worthy, according to Scripture, that's punishable by death.
Right, and then the other thing too with this is, the Father saying, "Don't leave him any longer than a day on the tree." Right. Mm-hmm. So in the Romans' time, though, at the time of Jesus' crucifixion, they would actually leave the dead bodies up for as long as they wanted to, as an example, because a lot of times where they would crucify them would be near a main road or some place that was busy, and so it was kind of a statement on their behalf of their power and of their authority. And that they would leave people up on the, be crucified and just leave them there. Says, hey, by the way, we're showing you who's in control here. And so the Father, from very back all the way to here, was saying at the very beginning, hey, don't do that.
Right.
It's one thing they had to die because of their sin, but we're not going to make a display of this for everyone.
Or humiliate them.
Right, humiliate them anymore, right?
They've got a family name, they've got history, they've got brothers, sisters, mother, fathers, and they're like, you got to go up there and see them, hang it up there all the time. And it's like, nope, you did wrong, address it, and let's move. The whole point is always to move forward with the Father, to get back in covenant.
Right.
And this person left, and they had to leave the world because of it. But you don't have to sit there and poke fun at it and make a big deal about it. Because guess what? As you're pointing, you should be really pointing the finger back at yourself and be thankful that's not you out there.
Yeah. Now, the last thing I want to point on this, and Chris, I'm going to let you go next, is also when we look at this wayward son, this isn't a little kid.
Right.
I mean, this thing's talking about him being a glutton and a drunkard. Excuse me. Him being a glutton and a drunkard. So we're talking about a grown man.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about a 12-year-old kid, 13. Hopefully we're not talking about a 12 or 13-year-old kid. Yeah. So you just been a little too much with me. You didn't drink out all my wine in the cellar. You got to go. But so we see this is an adult here that's being, this isn't, a little child that's being taken out and stoned before everybody. So.
Ms. Chrisman?
Yeah, so this whole thing about cursed is anyone who hangs on a tree. Again, context, right? So if you go back in Jewish history and literature, there's a lot of different examples of this. There's examples in some of the Apocrypha. Obviously, Josephus talks about this, and so on and so on. Obviously, the person, assuming they've committed a crime worthy of death, right? They already received their quote curse by being put to death, right? Because they have broken the Torah, and therefore they are receiving the curse that comes with breaking the Torah, right? If you do the Torah, you receive blessing. If you don't do the Torah, you receive cursing, right? We see that in Deuteronomy 28 or whatever. So anyway, regarding the whole curse is anyone who is hung on a tree. Yes, they receive the curse by being hung on the tree. However, if they remain on the tree or the cross or whatever, crucifix, okay, because we don't really know what it looks like, to be honest with you. At that point in time, if you keep them up there and you don't bury them within the 24-hour period before the sun goes down, essentially from the time that they're executed, it becomes a curse to God. And I know that sounds a little like, what? How could you curse God? But it's basically, it's an affront to him. It's as if it was a curse because man is made in his image, right? And so it's even though he's the one saying, yes, you need to execute him, but if you keep that person up there and they begin to now degrade and the vultures come and God knows what else comes for them, right? At that point in time, it's degrading to God, right? Because he's the one that made that creature in his image. And so, when you read that in Paul's letters later on, that's actually the context of what he's saying, right? Yes, there's a curse being put on the person who's, for whatever it is that they did. However, there's also a curse. It's as if it's a curse to God by leaving them there, right? And that's why it's considered a mitzvah, right? It's a good deed to bury the dead within 24 hours. And all Jewish burials are like that, right? So for instance, I've heard of people, whose maybe parents or family are living over in Israel, right? And they live here in the States. They pretty much just have to keep money ready for if that person dies, so they can literally fly out that day because they literally bury them within 24 hours. That's just their MO, right? And if you don't get there in time, you miss the funeral. They don't do the whole, hey, let's, with the exception of Jacob, right? And obviously probably Joseph because of the Egypt thing, right? But most of the time they don't do this whole embalming thing. They basically wash the body and wrap it just like they did with Yeshua, and they bury him the same day, right? That's why you saw them rushing to do it even more so because it was Shabbat for Yeshua. So just interesting customs and things to bear in mind and kind of the thinking behind it all and why certain statements are being made the way they are.
Thank you. 22?
Yep, 22.
22. All right. Chapter 22 of Deuteronomy. You shall not see your brother's ox or his sheep going astray and ignore them. You shall take them back to your brother, and if he does not live near you, and you do not know who he is, you shall bring it home to your house, and it shall stay with you until your brother seeks it. Then you shall restore it to him, and you shall do the same with his donkey or his garment, or with any lost thing of your brother's which he loses and you find. You may not ignore it. You shall not see your brother's donkey or his ox fallen down by the way and ignore them. You shall help him to lift them up again. A woman shall not wear a man's garment, nor shall a man put on a woman's clothes. For whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord your God. If you come... Verse 6. If you come across a bird's nest in any tree or on the ground with young ones or eggs, and the mother sitting on the young or on the eggs, you shall not take the mother with the young. You shall let the mother go, but the young you may take for yourself, that it may go well with you, and that you may live long. When you build a new house, you shall make a parapet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. for your roof, that you may not bring the guilt of blood upon your house. If anyone should fall from it, you shall not sow your vineyard with two kinds of seed, lest the whole field be forfeited. The crop that you have sown and the yield of the vineyard. You shall not plow with an ox and a donkey together. You shall not wear cloth of wool and linen mixed together. You shall make yourself tassels on the four corners of your garment with which you cover yourself. If any man takes a wife and goes into her and then hates her and accuses her of misconduct and brings a bad name upon her, saying, I took this woman, and when I came near her, I did not find in her evidence of virginity, then the father of the young woman and her mother shall take and bring out the evidence of her virginity to the elders of the city of the gate. And the father of the young woman shall say to the elders, I gave my daughter to this man to marry, and he hates her. And behold, he has accursed her of misconduct, saying, I did not find in your daughter evidence of virginity. And yet this is the evidence of my daughter's virginity. And they shall spread the cloak before the elders of the city. Then the elders of the city shall take the man and whip him, and they shall fine him 100 shekels of silver and give them to the father of the young woman, because he has brought a bad name upon a virgin of Israel. And she shall be his wife, and he may not divorce her all his days. But if the thing is true that the evidence of virginity was not found in the woman, then they shall bring out the young woman to the door of her father's house, and the men of her city shall stone her to death with stones, because she has done an outrageous thing in Israel by her father's house. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. If a man is found lying with the wife of another man, both of them shall die, the man who lay with the woman and the woman. So you shall purge the evil from Israel. If there is a betrothed virgin, and a man meets her in the city and lies with her, then you shall bring them both out to the gate of that city, and you shall stone them to death with stones. The young woman, because she did not cry for help, though she was in the city, and the man, because he violated his neighbor's wife, so you shall purge the evil from your midst. But if in the open country a man meets a young woman who is betrothed, and the man seizes her and lies with her, then only the man who lay with her shall die. But you shall do nothing to the young woman. She has committed no offense punishable by death. For this case is like that of a man attacked and murdering his neighbor, because he met her in the open country, and though the betrothed woman cried for help, there was no one to rescue her. If a man meets a virgin who is not betrothed and seizes her and lies with her, and they are found, then the man who lay with her shall give to the father of the young woman 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife, because he has violated her. He may not divorce her all his days. A man shall not take his father's wife, so that he does not uncover his father's nakedness. That's a lot. See, I was reading in verse 3, it was kind of reminded me of, like, it sounded like the original Lost and Found. It's like, if you find their donkey or their garment or any lost thing, keep it and wait until they come back and get it.
Yep.
So it literally was the original Lost and Found. Ms. Grissom?
Yeah, so this whole thing about the, the betrothed women or the unbetrothed women and interactions with men. This is one of the reasons why in Jewish society there is often this segregation of the sexes that you see happening so often, right? Particularly amongst Orthodox Jews, obviously not so much amongst those that are less observant. To the point where at weddings you have like a half for the men and half for the women, right? It's kind of bizarre for some people sometimes, but there's a reason, right? And it's about being above reproach. And this is one of the reasons why you saw Yosef like literally fleeing from sin, but nevertheless, as far as the the virgin daughter being accused or whatever. This is very similar to the previous portion we talked about. And also it harkens forward towards, the situation with Miriam and Yosef, and the birth of Yeshua and all of the misconceptions that were created because this was their paradigm. You know what I'm saying? Because, they would be looking at it from the outside, not knowing anything about how Mary got pregnant, and just thinking, oh my gosh, she's played the harlot, in her father's house kind of thing. And, maybe she found her a boyfriend, when she went to go visit her auntie and her uncle back in Jerusalem, and, they brought something back, So you can imagine how that type of rumor mill would spread to the point where you even see it in Yeshua's day as a grown man. You know what I'm saying? Like where they're basically, dogging on him later on about, this is like basically this is the the mamzer kid. This is the kid who's basically like, another word that we would say in English, I won't say right now, it's just basically a kid out of wedlock, right? And so, it was taken very seriously, right? Mm-hmm. Marriage, that whole, they don't call it wedlock for nothing, right? Because of wanting purity, right? Purity in the marital relationship, purity in the children, right? Not having like all these other kids. And, and also because of the family line, right? This is one of the reasons for the levirate marriage, where if a brother passes away, his other brother, if he's available, right, can marry the wife of the former brother so to keep his name going, essentially, right? And any children raised up with that, his brother's wife basically have his brother's name. So there was a big deal made within the patriarchy of keeping a man's name going. So again, that purity and not messing around with marriage and mixing was very big deal. We talked about the rape thing before, so even more so here, you see it, the difference between rape in the city versus rape in the country, right? The city obviously being a walled city, assuming it's very tight. People can, you can basically hear your neighbor hiccup, and cough. So of course, if a woman is being raped, she's supposed to scream and make all kinds of noise, and everyone's going to hear it, right? And somebody is going to do something about it. Whereas out in the country, we mentioned this before about, Ruth and Boaz, right? This is why he said, stick with the young women, and I've advised the young men not to lay a hand on you, because he knew how it could get out there, right? So just kind of tie things back, it helps bring things into context with that.
I have a thought.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Well, my thought is in verse 19, on the back part of it, it says, because he has brought a bad name upon a virgin of Israel, and she shall be his wife, he may not divorce her all his days. I guess I'm thinking of it in a modern day thinking, and I guess it could go into rape. If that was the situation in which this is kind of, basically, I don't know, rape. I wouldn't think the woman want to be, they say can't divorce her because of what he did, but what about the woman? She may not want to be with him because of what he did.
Well, I think, so later on, you're going to see the more like, so as we call it, rape scenario. Here you're just talking about they were in marriage. They were in a regular relationship, and he had relations with her, and then turned around and be like, oh, she wasn't even a virgin. I want all my restitution back. I want to send her away and get the next one. So here he's literally saying, I did the deed. She was there with me. Everything happened how it's supposed to. Nothing was wrong. Now I'm going to lie and make a narrative. He's saying, well, if you're going to do that, then you owe the father all this money, because the father's got to go around and fix his relationship now with all the people like, oh, your daughter's a harlot. Like, no. My daughter was a virgin. I can prove it, which is kind of gross. But
I was like, who keeps that? But, okay.
But that, yeah. So whenever they kind of go through that scenario, this is saying, hey, you don't be a bad guy. When you go into the scenario, when you enter this, when the scenario takes place, then you got to think about it in a way of like she's now saying, "Hey, we had a relationship last night. What are you talking about? Like, you're the reason I'm no longer a virgin. I was a virgin when I got here, and now you're saying that I wasn't." So then now the father would be responsible. He would be liable to divorce her. And you're like, no, that's why the rule is now you can't divorce her. He was doing this to get out of it. He's like, oh, you want to get out of it? No. Not only are you not going to get out of it, you can never get out of it. Because now you're known as a liar. So anything she says, you're just going to be the liar, right? And that's why it says that once you lose trust, because you got to think, who's this going before? The judges, the priest, and the Kohanim at the time. So they're going to look at him. I remember last time you literally lied because we had proof that you lied. Yeah, you're not getting divorced because whatever it's your fault. Now you got to pay to make sure this woman stays happy and blessed because there's rules of marriage that doesn't involve love, but it involves all the other stuff. You got to get her a house, a name, you have to feed her, clothe her, give her, all these things. He's like, you're stuck with this now, and then not because they wanted to make it bad for her. She actually was now getting what she deserved. Life of marriage, a life with a name. She had a covering now, not under her dad.
Yeah, and I kind of want to bring this into the scenario too. When Yeshua was speaking, he said, if a man looks upon a woman and lusts after her, he's already committed adultery in his heart. When you go back to the context of that story that was written, he's not talking about today we think, well, you look at someone and you lust after them. You have bad, the bad thoughts.
Oh, she's pretty.
What he was, in the whole context of what he was saying there, was talking about putting away your wife in a divorce, or putting someone away without giving them giving them their papers of divorce and different things. So to me, in context of what Yeshua was actually saying, is following up with this, was that he said, hey, if you're looking at another woman going, I'd rather be married to her, and you put this one away and don't even give her a proper divorce, he says the very thought of you doing that, you now already committed adultery in your heart, because it's not lusting after her in a sexual way, it's lusting at, I want her and not her. When you read this portion here, verses, it's kind of almost saying the same thing. It's kind of like, well, it's not really what I wanted, so I'm just going to make something up and get rid of her so I can go be with somebody else. And Jesus is saying, if that's your mindset, then you've already, the fact you were thinking about it, you've already committed adultery in your heart. So.
Right. And I think one of the other beautiful things is, sometimes we look back in this world and we're like, oh, women were less than, women were treated this way. It says submit to your husband. You're the weaker vessel. We don't read all this stuff. And you're like, no. The woman got their answer. Like, hey, if she was done wrong, then she got her restitution. The father got restitution. It's not like one of those, oh, she wasn't a virgin, just throw her in the pile. Next. Women had a role. They were very prized, and they were a prized thing to have, and to be in a relationship, to be in a marriage. And God cared about the women as much as He cared about the men. They just had different roles. And this is one example of that I think for me when I'm reading through is like, okay, you can't just get lied on, and well, you're a woman, you have no voice. Apparently not. She had a voice, and justice was served, in those scenarios. Crystal and Kyle, the two Ks, no, not a third K.
Sorry, I'm writing this China copy today. So regarding the proof of her virginity, if anyone has to listen to this, cover theirs. Okay. During traditional Jewish weddings, particularly back in the day, it was not uncommon during the ceremony to have a pause, right? Everybody else goes to the reception, so to speak, right? While they're whining and dining, they give the bride and groom time to go back to the bridal chamber, so to speak. And they had a special sheet, that was probably white, that was there so that, assuming the woman that was being married was a virgin, that her female heart inside would be broken, the seal, right? And therefore there would be blood. And that would get on the sheet. And that sheet then had to be turned in to the father, right? Talk about awkward now, right? But still, that was that proof of the virginity, okay? And it had to be done while this wedding is going on. Like, they just had the ceremony, guys are going to the reception, they're getting it on, right? Everyone knows it. That's the crazy thing. It's like, and they're expected to, right? You can't wait till later. Not like now, right? And you literally have to turn the sheet in to, Big Daddy, right? So he can hang on to it as the proof of your virginity. So the other thing, as far as the whole lust in the eye thing, adultery was a big deal. adultery was a very big deal, again, because of the purity thing. I don't think it's so much as far as what Yeshua's context that, it's someone who's already married per se, because of the reason, in Jewish society even today, right, if they're observant, particularly Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox, Jewish men, married or unmarried, okay, if they really are observant, and this might seem strange to our culture and maybe even a bit rude, but in their culture, it's respectful, right? If a woman is in the room, particularly obviously a woman who's very attractive, right? They will literally like look at her shoulder. Like they're trained to look at her shoulder instead, right? Obviously not her chest, right? But her shoulder. And the reason being is so that, they're not going to have lustful thoughts, right? And this is why you saw in the book of Job, right? He made a covenant with his eyes so that he wouldn't even look upon a maid, right? Granted, he was a married man, right? But still, like he would not look on a woman in that way because it would lead him to sin. And this is kind of a fence law, but it's an appropriate one. So it's about being able to constrain your natural impulses when they are going in a direction that could then lead you to sin, right? And we see from King Solomon that, he thought he could outsmart the system, but it didn't work out for him. And he ended up with so many wives to the point where, of course, all these foreign wives that led him into idolatry and was his downfall, but to the point where, Ecclesiastes or whatever, he's basically lamenting about, it's better to live on a rooftop than to basically have to live in a house with a nagging wife. Imagine if you have like hundreds of wives, right? So just context.
Yep, awesome. Thank you. Go ahead, Kyle.
Well, I think with just my thoughts on this is whether we're referring to the instructions that was given to us by the Father, or we're looking at all the man-made traditions that have come along considering this situation. I think it's very sad. I think it's very sad that there's a need for any of this. I think it speaks to the heart of man in general.
Mhm.
That it is, the heart of man is evil, deceitful, wicked.
Above all things.
That any of this would need to be put in place at all, either by the Father or man-made traditions. And I think that's the most important thing when choosing a mate, or even in where there's a tradition of having a mate chosen for you. I think problems come into this when there's when the heart of the Father is not being sought after, when it's more of a financial arrangement or more of a lustful seeking. If the heart of the Father and what He designed for marriage is not what's sought after, you're gonna run into all of these problems where you're gonna have all these stipulations in place, these checks and balances and all that stuff, where if we simply followed His instructions for love and care for one another and treating each other the way that we're supposed to treat each other, none of this would be necessary.
Mm-hmm.
I just think it's sad. That's it.
And thank you, Kyle. With that also being said, I am thankful to the Father that He did, like we were talking about earlier, Jonathan. He put a provision in here for the women. Because outside of this, outside of the Torah, outside of whatever the mainstream world was doing, women were not treated well at all. And so I think Him knowing that this mentality has been going on for a really long time, they're just coming out of midstream. So He's like, hey, we're going to cover all the bases here so that I'm understood, you're understood what to do. in these situations, and so that the woman can have a voice, she can be protected. And I think that's amazing that he's done that. And just like earlier, we had, I don't remember her name, but the lady that stepped forth, her and her sisters, who had no father or brothers, and they brought it to Moshe, and the father's like, "Hey, she's done good. She came to you, and this is what's going to take. Now, this is how it's going to proceed from here, so that even in these things, someone else who may come and go, oh, you have no covering. I'm just going to take all your inheritance." The father's made a provision so that the woman's inheritance as well is protected under his kingdom, under his authority. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, one
Right,
of
that- Joe, that was Zelophehad, the daughters of Zelophehad. It
Oh,
was
thank you.
Oprah and I think I forgot the last one's name, but yeah, that was a great reference.
There's a reason we don't remember it. That was hard to say.
Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, well, I think one of the other things we look at in here was, yeah, it reminds me of the verse. I'll bring in the context here in a second, but the verse where we talk about don't boil a lamb in its mother's milk.
Mm-hmm.
And we see tradition, all this other stuff, kind of say, oh, don't eat milk with meat, right? In
Don't
my mind,
have a cheeseburger.
right. In my
Yeah.
mind, that's absolutely nothing to do with that. I think that's just kind of like a maybe misinterpretation, misunderstanding of what's really being said there. It's talking about the natural order of things, and why do you have to go to such extremes to kind of make this like, where's your heart? Where's your how are you? Where's your humanity? I guess, right? And then we're going to see that come in here in verse 6, where it says, if you come across a bird's nest in a tree or on the ground with its, sitting on the young or the eggs, hey, you can eat the eggs. It's not. I don't want you to starve or anything. Like, yeah, I know that I left eggs for you as food, but don't kill the mom too, or don't take the mom and leave the eggs and let the eggs die. Like, if whatever you're going to do, try to keep it within the natural order of things. And it shows, God's heart a little bit. And it's a really weird verse to kind of throw in there, because we also see, like, make sure your roof's not uncovered so people can die. It's about protection. It's about life. It's about continuing on the natural order and the reproduction of things and whatnot. And it was just one of those things where I was like, yeah, take care of your brother's ox and their donkey and this. Don't eat the eggs of the bird. Don't take the bird away from the eggs, or vice versa. And you're like, that's kind of strange. What is he kind of getting at? And you'll see that kind of play in a few more times, like I said, with the lamb and the mother's milk. And it's just one of those things where it seems like God's never designed for us to take our own liberties in how we interact with nature. A lot of times we think of, oh, we can only sin against man, right? And we go back. Oh, I just had a thought, so maybe go with me for a second. We talk about the Nephilim. It says they sinned against bird, they sinned against animal, they sinned against man, right? And the earth. So I wonder if this even is part of that. They were, killing all the moms, leaving all the eggs, or they were just doing stuff the wrong way, not the way that God designed it. So he's like, the reason I'm spelling this out for you is because people have done it wrong. And why is he setting it up that way? Just so nature can continue doing what nature does. And so we don't get any kind of weird thing of like, ooh, I'm going to boil you in your mom's milk. Because where's your like headspace in that? You know what I mean? It's got like, it's going to be a little bit weird to do that. Like, you have all these options. You're like, all these other milks out there, your milk and your baby. Now what? So I thought that was interesting with the bird's nest thing.
Yep.
Ms. Kristen?
Yeah, so I totally agree with you. I think it's really about compassion and not being cruel, essentially, right? Even in kashrut, as far as having a can't think of the word right now. Basically, kosher slaughter, right, and butchering and things like that. It's all about, if you are going to have to take the life of an animal, do it in the least cruel way, so it causes them the least pain, right? It's quick, it's over with, right? And also in such a way that you are not taking in the life of that animal, right? Because the life is in the blood, and also to some extent the life is in the milk, because it is the sustenance that sustains their children,
Right. Yep.
right? Progeny. So it's an affront to take what was meant to sustain life for that calf or whatever it is, right? To then take that, especially in the mother's presence, right, and boil that calf or that kid in its own mother's milk, what God intended for it to keep it alive, right? which is one of the reasons why it was a pagan practice, because of that whole symbolism of life between blood and milk. Okay. Because as a mother, and all the mamas can attest to this, right? You are giving of yourself, right? And that's one of the reasons why women are encouraged, particularly when they're nursing, you got to up your game on your nutrition, and especially obviously while you're in gestation. There's a reason why it's called gestation. Your baby's basically feeding off of you like a leech. Not to make it sound so weird, but it drains. And a lot of women, if they don't, they can end up with osteoporosis later on. Because it's literally draining the life out of you. Hence the old wives' tale. If you're having a boy, they give you beauty. If you're having a girl, she takes your beauty, so to speak, right? And also, as far as the, taking the eggs, leaving the mother, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's about compassion. It's about doing right by God's creation, by God, and sustaining these things. And it really says a lot when we go beyond that. And I think to bring it in a modern context, like for instance, like taking out the whole of the Amazon forest just so we can have paper in our printer, right? And then now you've wiped out an entire ecosystem, not to mention all the animals and creatures and people that might have sustained it. So there's actually this connection as far as, maintaining the garden, right? All goes back to the garden, right? Are we maintaining the garden? Are we doing right to sustain and to guard and to care for what God has given us?
Awesome. Thank you. All right, I got it. All right, guys, jump into 23. This sounds like it's going to be fun. He who is wounded by crushing of testicles, yep, or whose penis is cut off, shall not enter into the community of Yahuwah. And Mamzer, aka Hebrew, shall not enter the community of Yahuwah. Even a 10th generation of his shall not enter the community of Yahuwah. An Amorite or a Moabite shall not enter the assembly of Yahuwah. Even a 10th generation of them shall not ever enter the assembly of Yahuwah, because they did not meet with you with bread and water on the way when you came out of Mitzrayim, and because they hired against you Balaam, son of Beor, from Pethor of Aram, Natharim, to curse you. But Yahuwah, your Elohim, refused to listen to Balaam, and Yahuwah, your Elohim, turned the curse into a blessing for you, because Yahuwah, your Elohim, loves you. Do not seek their peace nor their good all your days forever. Do not loathe an Edomite, for he is your brother. Do not loathe a Misrian, because you were a stranger in his land. The children of the 3rd generation born to them do enter the assembly of Yahuwah. When the camp goes out against your enemies, then you shall guard yourself from every evil matter. When there is any man among you who is not clean because of an emission in the night, then he shall go outside the camp. Let him not come into the midst of the camp. And it shall be at the approach of the evening that he bathes with water, and when the sun sets, let him come into the midst of the camp. And you shall have a place outside the camp where you shall go out, and you shall have a sharp implement among your equipment. And when you sit down outside, you shall dig with it and turn and cover your excrement. For Yahuwah, your Elohim, walks in the midst of your camp to deliver you and to give your enemies over to you. Therefore your camp shall be set apart, so that he does not see unclean matter among you, and shall turn away from you. You do not hand over to his master the slave who has escaped from his master to you. Let him dwell with you in your midst, in the place which he chooses within one of your gates, where it is pleasing to him. Do not oppress him. None of the daughters of Israel is to be a cult prostitute, or any of the sons of Israel a cult prostitute. Do not bring the harlot fee of a whore, or the pay of a dog to the house of Yahuwah, your Elohim, for any vowed offering, for both of these are an abomination to Yahuwah, your Elohim. Do not lend at interest to your brother, interest of silver, interest of food, or interest of whatever is lent at interest. To a foreigner you lend at interest, but to your brother do not lend at interest, so that Yahuwah, your Elohim, might bless you in all that you put your hands to in the land which you are entering to possess. When you make a vow to Yahuwah, your Elohim, do not delay to pay it, for Yahuwah, your Elohim, is certainly requiring it of you, and it shall be sin in you. But when you abstain from vowing, it is not a sin in you. That which has gone from your lips you shall guard and do, for you voluntarily vow to Yahuwah your Elohim what you have promised with your mouth. When you come into your neighbor's vineyard, you shall eat to the satisfaction of your desire, but do not put any in a receptacle of yours. When you come into your neighbor's standing grain, you shall pluck the heads with your hands, and do not use a sickle on your neighbor's standing grain.
All right, so to get this out of the way early, in the first part of 23, obviously there's some more easy to understand words that's saying. Okay, let's say it's accidental. If you were to have an issue down there for the male parts, or like a vasectomy, for instance. I want to see you guys' opinion. We got about 15 some odd people that I can ask, so I'm going to go ahead and ask it. Does that fit in this category? Is it different? Is it the same? What are you guys thinking?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Nope. Yeah. So essentially saying no one no one whose testicles are crushed or whose male organ is cut off shall enter the assembly of the Lord. I know there's a lot of cult practices about the eunuchs and different things like that done the wrong way. But I was asking, what if this was accidental? Somehow or another, you got into a big accident, something bad happened down there, or in the modern world, like you have a vasectomy. Is this talking about the purpose of? Earlier we were talking about the natural order of things. If you no longer can produce, if you no longer have that ability, is that the direction this is going, or is this just literally talking about genital mutilation and that kind of stuff? So there's a lot of implications. Let's see what you guys are thinking. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, we obviously can tell from the account of the book of Esther that it was very common in, royal palaces that they would take slaves, and the male slaves that were going to be working anywhere near the royal family would be made to be eunuchs because of the risk, right? Now, obviously, we can tell from the account of Yosef in Egypt that Potiphar, even though he worked for the royal family, was not royal himself. Otherwise, Yosef would have been a eunuch, right? Having that kind of proximity with the wife of Potiphar and so on and so on. Whereas in Esther's case, the eunuch that gave her favor obviously was working with the royal family and therefore had to be made a eunuch, right? And as far as how that interacted with their ability within Jewish society to be able to come to the temple and perform whatever ceremonies at the temple, later on, I think in the book of Leviticus, you have to look and see when it talks about the actual Levitical family. Okay, it talks about this as well, right? If they have some kind of deformity of any kind, whether it be with those parts or other parts, right? They are still technically a Levite, and they're allowed to eat the showbread and the meat, this sacrificial meat. However, they're not allowed to essentially perform duties at the temple, right, or anything around it, surrounding it, for that reason, because basically there's a defect, right? They don't have that standard of quote unquote physical wholeness, okay, that their brothers might, right? And everything that comes in God's presence, at least in terms of actually serving at the temple as a Levite, had to be in a state of wholeness, as well as in a state of purity. This is the same reason why the same standards are applied to the sacrificial animals that are going to be coming to God, right? And this is why he calls them, through the prophets, he calls the Israelites out about it. Hey, would you bring this type of animal to your governor? Would he accept it? So the similar standard is being placed upon humans too, right? Because we're all his creation. So it seems unjust and unfair in some ways, and maybe, again, context is key, but it's important to bear in mind that, God has standards. He does. We may not agree with them, but he does have standards that have to be abided by, particularly because of his holiness.
Is everybody still there? Or got really quiet?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't want to move on. Somebody has something to say. Kyle, were you going to say something or no?
Yeah, I was just checking on everybody.
Oh, okay.
Oh, look.
Melody made a comment.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Next one. Next part. All right. So outside of that, in verse 3, it says, "No Ammonite or Moabite may enter the assembly of the Lord."
There's another comment.
I'll read that one. I think there's something interesting there because weren't we reading last night when we were recording for Anchor to Truth about Lot and his two daughters and how the children of Lot are from his daughters, and I think one of them was the Moabite, and it talked about that they would be accursed or they would never enter, something like that in Jubilees. It was very clearly distinct. I don't have to look in front of me, but I wonder if the Ammonite and Moabite are both the offspring of those two daughters. Because I know Moab is, but I don't remember for sure the Ammonites, or if they were called by something different. But very interesting to see that exact same language, and then in Jubilees you see the reason why. Because right here you don't really see why. You just see, hey, these guys, they're not going to make it. But why? It's just random. You just pick two random people and say no. But now we can kind of go back and see the reason for it.
Yeah, and what we had read last night too, what was interesting about that is it when in the wording of Jubilee said that nothing like this has happened since the beginning of time, basically the time of Adam. And so what that took place with Lot and his two daughters was like that bad that it was written that, hey, we haven't had anything like this since the beginning of, since the time of Adam. And so I think when we're reading this too, and it talks about, I'm not sure about the Ammonite. It says the Ammonite or the Moabite, so I'm assuming that it means that they're connected together somehow.
Right.
And this could be the offspring of that union. Yeah, I would say it says even to the 10th generation, they shall never enter the assembly of Yahuwah. And then Ruby Bowl, you'd put in there, what about the resurrection when we get new bodies? Hallelujah. We're all looking forward to that one. All of us are going to need an overhaul by that point. But I think, at that point, if you made it to that point of, hallelujah, praise the Father, if we all get to that point where he says, well done, good and faithful servant, by the way, here's your new body. I think it's going to be an amazing time. So. And then what I thought too was interesting here was even down to the even down to keeping the camp clean. What is it?
Well, no, the two people that are there are listed would essentially be his Lot's sons, grandsons, his daughters, children from that union.
Awesome, man. Good job.
Yeah. It's in Jubilee 16 also, if you guys go back and look at that story. But what verse chapter was that? Genesis what now?
Genesis. 1937 and 38.
Nice. So now we know the reason why the Ammonites or the Moabites may not ever enter the assembly.
Yeah.
It's due to that Lot sin issue.
Nope. Hopefully so. All right, then the thing too about this is it seems like a lot of like information that's just like back to back to back. It's not nothing that necessarily connects. It's almost like I'm gonna give it to y'all right now. From the time of this to this. By the way, the Amorite and the Moabite, no, can't do it right now. Not until the 10th generation. You see it here. Talks about when they came out. It says, "Do not seek the peace or their goods." At Pethor of Aram Natharim, because they wanted to curse you. It says, "Do not seek peace nor their goods all of your days. Do not loathe an Edomite, for he is your brother." Oh, I'm sorry, I went too far. Where it says, basically when they were coming out, he says, "Hey, they didn't even offer you water. They didn't offer you any help whatsoever." Then you kind of see where it goes into the camp also, just the fact that the father's like, "Hey, by the way, when you're in the camp, here's some hygiene tips for you when this happens. Okay. By the way, when you go on to go when you go to sit, number 2, if you didn't know that, ladies and gentlemen, that's what he's talking about. When you go to sit outside the camp, it made me remind me of my wife's Japanese heritage because they sit on the floor or squat. They squat. Right, they squat.
We squat too. There's just a toilet.
Well, yeah, but ours, we're just higher off the ground. I remember
good legs and knees.
Right, good legs and knees. But you see, even here, the father saying, "Hey, by the way, I'm gonna be in the midst of the camp, so take care of your mess. Yeah. Literally, take care of your mess. Don't leave it out."
No bless this mess there.
Yeah, no. There's no blessing on that mess. It speaks about prostitution here with the boys and the girls, which I think is very important because that's one of the big issues we have today with the child trafficking issue. Yeah. Then it goes into 19, talks about the money. Says not to lend to your brother with interest. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's key there. But what was interesting, I kind of laughed to myself. It says, "To a foreigner, you lend at interest."
20%.
20%. Please, 29.99% interest for you. Now, the other part of this I thought was interesting. Now, this is talking about when you make a vow. I remember Yeshua saying, "Let your yes be yes and your no be no," right? And so that we're not making a vow. "I swear upon the blah, blah, blah." And God's like, "Well, I'm going to hold you to that now because you just made a vow or you just made a statement upon something." That's why it says, it goes in there further to say, it says, "Hey, don't swear upon this earth, don't swear upon God's throne, don't swear upon anything." The old saying was, "I swear on my dead mother's grave," or something like that. It's like, don't do that. Right. Okay. He's saying basically, when it comes down to it, when you make a vow, God's going to hold you to it though. Mm-hmm. So if you do open up your mouth and say, "I swear by next week on Wednesday, I'm going to pay you back everything, God." And then, that week goes by, then that week God's like, "Wait a minute, remember your vow to me that you made. I'm still going to hold you to that." Right. So it's better to let your yes be yes and your no be no when it comes to these matters.
Yeah, the next week they're like, "Why'd you cut my hours?" I said I was getting my money.
That's right. Why does my paycheck look a little lighter? Well, that's right.
I think too, like if we want to cap this one out, in 24 or 25, we're talking about going to their vineyard and eat the grapes. And I kind of love that because
don't bring your basket with you.
Yeah, exactly. Don't make this a meal. Don't feed your family. Don't go and sell this stuff later. But like in Italy, when I lived there for 5 years, and they very much still have this culture of like we go to the they call them agriturismo, and it's essentially like a big place where they have all this agriculture. They may have a pool. They may have some like different horses or whatever, and it's just fig trees forever, little blackberry bushes, just a nice area to walk around. There's fruit everywhere. And they're like, "Yeah, just, if you see a fig you like, pick it, eat it, and, keep walking, have a good time." And it very much reminded me of that, like, yeah, of course, go and have a fig here and there. If you have a tree with 3,000 figs on it and you eat 7,
Whoa.
Well, what?
the camera's shifting. If you have 7, it's not going to be a big
Move it
deal.
that way.
But if
Sorry,
you
my
go
dog.
there and you take a basket like Joe was
That's
saying,
good.
or you bring in farm equipment, and you're like, oh yeah, I'm getting. It's just like, well, you missed the intent. If it's about life, it's about sustaining you. Maybe you've been wandering all day and you got lost, and you're like, man, if I don't eat something soon, I'm gonna pass out. It's like, oh, get you a couple things to eat. Get you some grapes. Hey, if you're in the field and you see some grain, pluck a few heads.
Yeah.
Get enough in your system.
Don't go in there with your sickle and clean
Right.
house.
You start tying them up, throwing them in your backpack. Getting the donkey with the cart.
We're making bread later.
Right. And of course, obviously, again, I think it's really interesting. The second chapter in a row, we see a direct connection to Yeshua when he's walking through the field with his disciples, and they're like, whoa, what are you doing? He's like, what do you mean? Picking the heads and crushing my hand. Like, it's a completely normal thing. It's written in Torah. Obviously, these people who were calling him out didn't understand their Bible, right? Because we can see this as clear as day. They must have either not known or just getting on his case because they wanted to.
Yeah, they're more likely looking for something, just anything they could find, that aggravate him or to get him on something.
Miss Kristen?
Yeah, a lot to unpack there. Unfortunately, I don't have my physical Bible in front of me. I can't do both at the same time, so from a mobile. So I'm like, dang it. But one thing I wanted to definitely loop back to as far as the whole Moabite Ammonite thing, this kind of goes back to the whole crushing of male anatomy, eunuchs, so on. Obviously, this whole thrust to fulfill the mitzvah, be fruitful and multiply, right? It just goes to show you how much more seriously people back then took it, okay? And partly because there was a lot less population, right? And on top of that, it was magnified by the fact that you needed so much more manual labor to get anything done. They didn't have dishwashers. They didn't have washing machines. They didn't have any of that stuff. People did that. They didn't have harvesters for, your cornfield or your whatever field. You had to have physical people doing every single inch of that. So you needed some people, okay? And so the number of progeny you had was also kind of indicative of your wealth, right? And your ability to produce, not just, of the fruit of your womb, so to speak, but also physically, right? There was none of this just, letting your kid just have, be lackadaisical playing video games all day. I mean, they had to work, right? So there's that. The other thing that I wanted to say, and this is one reason I realize it's good. I'm going to give you a trigger warning for all of you that are like anti-rabbi, anti-whatever. I'm just warning you. You've been warned, you've been told, okay? This is why I do take the quote-unquote oral Torah or rabbinic traditions and whatever, all the historical references. I do take it with a grain of salt, okay? That doesn't mean to say I believe every little thing and I subscribe to every little thing. But in every tradition or whatever, there's a little bit of truth, right? And if we miss it, we're missing a little piece of history, right? So, just like with any other account of things, like, the Roman accounts, for instance, of their battles, they probably exaggerated it like an old man does his fishtails. We were the best, we took them all out, we torched their place, and really it was probably like half that, right? So that's kind of the mindset I take to that. And the reason why it's relevant to this is about the situation with the Moabites and Ammonites, okay? And particularly as it relates to Yeshua. Because if we go based on the Torah only, then Yeshua would have been considered a man there, right? If you think about it, and also David for that matter, right? Because they all came from the same grandmother, right? They came through Ruth. What was Ruth? She was a Moabitess, right? And it was actually the prophet Samuel, the same one that anointed David, who made the exception for female Moabitesses, right? Because in the Torah, it says Moabite, which in the Hebrew is the masculine form. And so he basically said, well, hey, that applies to the men, but it doesn't have to apply to the women, right? And therefore, if the woman will accept our lifestyle, she will convert, basically, okay? If she will become one of us, then we will accept her and she can come into the assembly, but the men can't. Okay, because obviously the man is going to be the head of the household, and he's going to be the one running the show as far as their culture, their beliefs, their whatever. It's going to be coming from the top down. And so therefore, that's why we can't let the men in. We could let the women in because obviously the understanding is she's coming under, the man. And that's the way it was supposed to operate. Obviously, we see exceptions where that didn't, and that's one of the reasons why, God warned against taking on foreign wives. However, if they were willing to convert, if they were willing to take on the Torah, to take on his ways, then they were accepted into the assembly with this exception. So, and that is only found in the quote unquote oral Torah. So if there was no acceptance of Ruth as a Moabitess, right, then we wouldn't have King David. King David would have been considered illegitimate because his whole line would have been illegitimate, right, from Ruth onwards, from Ruth and Boaz. In addition, obviously, by proxy, Yeshua would have been illegitimate. So a lot to be said there about that. And so, there's a lot to be said about these important exceptions, how they relate to history, and obviously to our beliefs in Yeshua. I think there are some other topics that you guys covered. I'm sorry, I don't have, again, the scripture in front of me, but I really wanted to hit on them. Can you give me the highlights real quick? Sorry, guys.
The
I think
highlights.
Joe brought up a few.
Well, we pretty much went all the way through the chapter, I think.
Charging interest and eating grapes and grain.
And about
Thank you so
the
much. I
yeah.
appreciate that.
Poop.
So yes, and very important about the poop, right? I remember actually there was a Christian pastor, that guy that is always, he's like Asian, he's like, hallelujah, right? He had us a whole sermon about that. I was dying here watching him go through this whole thing about, of course he's saying in Old English, when you go out to the field and you shovel it, and you poop it, and you whatever, you actually saw that play out in the Athene colony at, what's the name of it? Qumran, right? They actually found the public toilet, so to speak, right? Where they all did their business. I guess it was petrified underneath or something. And the thing about it is that some of them actually had some health issues because of it, because they were not maybe covering it well enough. Maybe they didn't dig deep enough, and the next guy came, because they were super religious, right? And they wanted to maintain themselves in a state of purity at all times, because they had cut themselves off from the actual temple at the time because they felt it was corrupt, and it was, right? And so they sort of kind of just kept themselves in a state of ritual purity at all times. So after they would go do their business, they would go to mikvah, right? Which is basically that ritual immersion, right? But they're bringing the stuff from their feet, because they would go barefoot to do business, right? Bringing it into the mikvah. Now you've liquefied it, and you've made it accessible to the rest of the body, right? And they had some health issues because of it, right? They didn't wash their feet first like they were supposed to. So interesting little historical notes there. Regarding the grain thing, I think we mentioned it before, right? About the whole issue that Yeshua had with those guys, it wasn't so much that they were, that they were wrong about that Torah prohibition, right? To harvest grain was considered working, right? Because you would pay someone to do it, right? Granted, they were doing it for single serving, mind you, but the reason why they were being forced to have to do that was because their brothers among them, where they were not showing them hospitality. And that is an affront to God, to the point that that's one of the reasons why he took out Sodom and Gomorrah, right? If you go back and you look in the Apocrypha, that's one of the reasons, and that's one of the reasons why in the Apocrypha and Jubilees, I think it is, it talks about how, quote, Father Abraham, he even created kind of like a crossroads garden, so that he could get people to stop and pick fruit and eat and rest and, and kind of just refresh themselves. And while they were there, he would basically evangelize them, right? He would talk to them about the one true God. So, hospitality is supposed to be part of our ministry. And it's important to bear that in mind. I think in modern society, we become so individualistic and selfish that we've forgotten about that. So, and then as far as the taxing and usury, you'll notice in Muslim societies, Okay, this is something I remember seeing even when we were living in London, because I worked at one point in East London, literally right across from a mosque. Right, so every Friday it's like, oh, like, oh my gosh, look at it's so loud. But right next door, like 2 doors down or something from where the nonprofit I worked at was a Muslim bank. And when a Muslim comes to do banking there, they are not allowed to charge an interest. If somebody else wanted to come and do business there, they charge an interest because they subscribe to this same belief. It was sort of, appropriated from the Torah, right? And if you go back to the blessings and the curses, it's in there. Charging interest or having interest charged to you is considered a curse, which is one of the reasons why I'm just very anti-charging interest or being charged interest, because it's considered a curse, right? You shouldn't do that to your brother, your fellow man. But to your enemies, it was seen as a means of being able to oppress and suppress them so that they would not be in a financial position to then build up an army and come against you, right? So there was a reason why God allowed it for foreigners who obviously were not willing to become part of Israel and take on their beliefs and their culture and so on, and of course serve the one true God, versus, the ones who did, right? You would not be able to charge interest to, the guy the sojourner who's living with you, who is subscribing to your beliefs and your ways, right? Even though he may not be ethnically of your tribe, right? So just some highlights there on all of that as far as those topics. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Try to put that back on.
How long's it been off?
It's been off since you started reading.
Oh,
Sorry.
God.
Sorry for people online that we lost audio there for a second.
For the YouTubers.
Yeah, for the YouTubers.
All right, so real quick for everybody on YouTube, we did read through chapter 24.
Yep.
So if you want to go ahead and catch up real quick, push pause or whatnot, if you're watching this later, whole chapter of 24. So far, I've brought up only verse 6, where it talks about the millstone, not taking away someone's ability to live, their livelihood. Don't take away their cloak that they're going to sleep in that night. But also, same thing, like don't go into their house and try to steal their pennies or their quarters. Stand outside and ask nicely. If they can't figure it out, let God handle that. And then Joe's going to jump in.
Yeah, and I think that part there is a level of respect. Don't go into man's house.
Mhm.
Don't go in there like plundering, trying to get what you think is yours. Give him is giving him respect. Or let him bring it out to you, whatever he owes you.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about the millstone and about not taking away the millstone from him. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Now can't eat.
Mm-hmm.
In today's society, I've seen where men get arrested for child support, and I'll be honest with you, the whole system's messed up because I've seen guys that I know for a fact pay their child support, but because it wasn't documented properly, get arrested and thrown in jail. Now I'm like, okay, how is this man supposed to then support his family? So you threw him in jail because he didn't pay child support, but now he really can't pay child support because now you have him in jail. So now not only is he suffering, but now the people he's supposed to be taking care of are now suffering even more. So I always thought that was a little bit backwards or not, the best way to do it. And verse 8, you see the tie-in with verse 8 and 9, if you didn't know that, because it talks about leprosy. And going to the priest at the time were kind of like the doctors as well. They had to examine you, look at you, see. We already read those chapters before about if it's white, if it has a hair, if it has this. And, it's like, so they had to be dermatologists on top of everything else. But then you see the tie in the 9 says, remember what Yahuwah, your Elohim, did to Miriam on the way when you came out of Mitzrayim. If you don't remember that story, she doing some back talking to Moshe. I'm just paraphrasing. And Father called both of them and Aaron into his midst and said, hey, can't have all this, and then gave her leprosy. And if it wasn't for the prayer or the request of Moshe, who knows how long that would have stayed with her. So that's a tie in there. What else we got here?
I got something real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
So 16, 17. So I'm normally one that kind of just likes to think about something, expand on it, and then get back to what it's actually saying. So 16, talking about fathers shouldn't be put to death for their children, and vice versa, children don't be put to death for their father. But what I'm reading here is saying, if you're the sinner, if you're the one who committed the crime, if you're the one who's done wrong, it's on you. And it's interesting that it goes from father to children. So, earlier it said if your son is drunkard or whatever, hey, that's probably talking about an adult kid. This right here says children. This is probably a younger person. And it's saying, hey, whoever is the one who commits the crime, they're the one who gets punished for it. But what's interesting, and I'm kind of trying to apply this to our world today because, of all the conversation of what's Torah, how do we keep it, why do we keep it, do we hold these people to the standard? Well, the church people don't want to do it because they think Sunday, right? This argument, this conversation has gone on for years. 17 says, you shall not pervert the justice due to the sojourner or to the fatherless or take a widow's garment. And I'm kind of reading that and saying, don't pervert the way you do stuff, right? If there's a rule, if there's the expectation, that's the rule and that's the expectation. We don't change things. We don't allow, well, they're new, they don't understand. Oh, well, that's just that's their understanding. God's like, I don't care. Like, if I said don't do it, don't do it. Like, just because you don't know about God doesn't mean you can go kill somebody. Right. Just because you go to Sunday church doesn't mean you can steal from somebody. Just because you believe in all of Torah doesn't mean you can take your neighbor's donkey or whatever it says, right? Because we're all held to the same standard. And you see that in 8, where it says, do all that the Levitical priests shall direct you. So the Levitical priests are reading these scrolls, these books, and saying, do this stuff. And then he's saying, yes, do the stuff that they tell you to do the stuff. And then later on it says, yeah, that stuff that I'm telling you, even for the sojourners, you don't change the rules, you don't pervert it, you don't make it something else. Man, do this, do this, do this. Now you can send them out, they can leave, but if they're going to be here, they got to be here. I think that's very interesting.
Yep.
Be there or be square.
And then, going down just a little bit further from there in 19, we see again, and there's always a connection with food and people, right? We got the millstone. Don't mess with the man's millstone. Let him eat. Don't, again in 17, we're saying do not twist the right ruling of a stranger or the fatherless, nor take the garment of a widow. Hey, treat everybody the way you'd want to be treated. The whole golden rule thing. And then it says, hey, just remember, because that's a lot of times I think we have to remember where you came from.
Mm-hmm.
I think in our walk, sometimes we may look at someone and judge them harshly or say, oh, look at what they're doing. But then we have to remember that if we're, look at where they are in their journey and where they are with the Father. And, maybe there's somebody who just came into this walk. Guess what? They're going to be messing up all over the place. And I think that's where we have to remember ourselves. Hey, I was there too. I remember when I didn't understand anything in Torah when we first got started. It was all over our heads and just doing the best we could to grasp onto anything that we could. So I think that's important that we always remember where you come from, always remember how you got there, because we're all on the same journey. Mm-hmm. And then when it gets to the harvest again in the field, 19, it says, when you reap your harvest in your field and have forgotten a sheaf in the field. Oh my, I've forgotten my sheaf in the field.
You see that one piece of grain over there?
Yeah.
That's mine.
You're on your donkey or your horse and you're far away. You look back, I forgot one. God said, no, leave it. Maybe the angel come by and knock it off your cart anyway. It was like, hey,
blows off the back.
Yeah, we got to feed some people over here. It says you have forgotten a sheaf in the field. Do not go back to get it. Let it be for the stranger, for the fatherless, for the widow, so that Yahuwah your Elohim might bless you in all the work of your hands. So the Father's saying, hey, don't sweat the one sheaf, because you got all of this. I'm blessing you, right? Yeah. And here's the thing that I've learned: the more that we learn to be a blessing, the more that blessing comes around. And we don't do the blessing for the blessing, you know what I'm saying? But when we're doing it to benefit one another, that means that blessing multiplies in the proper way, not in someone's bank account, not new jets and new $1 million homes. It means that this prospers in the way that people are taken care of and their needs are met. Right. Even all the way to, it says, if you beat your olive trees, do not examine the branch behind you. Did I get that one or not?
Oh, there's one way at the top. I'm going to climb and try to break my arm.
Right.
One
right.
Arm.
Yeah, let the stranger or the fatherless go break their arm, right? I'm kidding. But I'll leave that one up there for them, Lord. They can have that one. You might come back and the whole tree be cut down. It's like,
we got that one, though.
Yeah, we got that one. But again, it says, let it be for the stranger, for the fatherless, and for the widow. And when you gather your grapes in the vineyard, do not lean behind you. Let it be for the stranger, for the fatherless, and the widow. And you shall remember that you were a slave in the land. Again, he's giving you this reminder. Hey, remember where I brought you from. Mm-hmm. And again, that's what I love. I'll always say this forever and ever. I love God's economy because everybody gets to eat. Everyone gets taken care of. And this is to me, this is what Torah is about. It's about life. It's about community. It's about our relationship with our Heavenly Father. And he's saying, hey, it's not just about me, guys, but I want you to take care of each other as well, so that there are no needs in the midst of our camp. Amen.
I think the only other thing we didn't cover was the little beginning part there. I think it's interesting. It talks about that certificate of divorce. It doesn't, we kind of look at it today, especially like in our modern world laws and stuff, it has to be somebody stepped out or somebody's literally like, in a mental home. There's all these like very specific rules, and then, it's all this legal stuff. Legal things involved, lawyers and all stuff. But here's the saying, hey, if she finds no favor in his eyes, like he's pretty much just looks at her and goes, whatever, kind of, she's just out of the picture in his life, or he finds some indecency in her, then he writes her a certificate of divorce and hands it to her and sends her out. So it's one of the things that I did want to bring up though, is this isn't ugly, this isn't messy. Now I'm sure it got ugly and messy because they had to kind of figure out a way to get back to normalcy in their lives. They both lost each other. They both had to split and make a new life for themselves, a new name. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't this, everybody's dragging each other through the court. People are posting all over Facebook, well, she did this and I did that and I said this and I checked his phone and she did that thing. Right? None of this is getting messy here. It's just saying, hey, she wasn't it. He recognized it. He's like, hey, just so you know, I don't want anything bad to happen to you. But, this part of the relationship is going to be over. And, he does it all right the proper way. So I just think it's one of the things, obviously, because divorce is the same in the church and the world, this is an area that we can show some, what's the word I'm looking for? We can show some grace, we can show some love, but we also can show, hey, there is a proper order of things, right? Not everything works out perfect. There's no perfect sacrifice. There's no perfect anything that humans can do. We have sins built into the picture. But if we're going to do stuff, do it the right way, do it according to Scripture, and do it out of love. I don't think any of these scenarios, he's like, I hate you so much. I want you to do this. He's just like, hey man, this just ain't it. So it's interesting because the Bible just, I mean, literally we've talked about it like 12 different times already, but there's a way to go about stuff.
Yeah.
Same thing with like loaning interest. There's a way to do it.
Right. And I would say, the Father definitely is not in favor of divorce whatsoever. And we see that in the words of Yeshua, that he's not in a phase of, hey, because of your stiff-neckedness, this is why Moshe put this in there for you, because he already knew your hearts. And so, but the most important thing here is, like, if you're going to do this, the thing we can't miss here is that you can't just put her away.
Right.
You can't just say, get out of my tent, get out of my house.
Bye.
Get off of the roof, wherever you're at, you got to go. What he's saying is, if this is going to happen, though I don't want it to happen, the best thing for her, though, it really is looking out for the woman in the situation.
Yep.
If she doesn't have a letter of divorce or certificate of divorce, she still technically is with him.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Again.
right. So then the father's saying, hey, you can't, she's not free to marry anyone else or to be with anyone else, because you have not given her a proper divorce. You have not given her her papers, so that when she does meet someone else, he can say, oh, you're not with so-and-so. Do you have your papers? Yes, I have them right here.
Right. It's all in the up and up.
It's all in the up and up. It's all clear. And that way this woman's free to have another covering, because, again, even though in God's economy she does have rights, she is being protected, as the world.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to do what the world does. And so for her protection, he's like, give her her letter so that she can go in freedom.
Yeah, and I think it clarifies too, because I think because this is such a big thing, right? It wasn't intended, it was never meant to be, and it kind of had to be thrown in because of man, right? Man, woman, man as a whole. He's like, hey, if you're gonna go as far as to send her away, don't think you can get her back. Don't try to repent and say, oh well, I changed my mind, or
Right.
oh well, I know your husband died, I'll just bring you back. He's like, no. If it didn't work, it didn't work. Why would you go back into a scenario that's going to cause you to sin or it's going to cause problems?
Right.
So I thought it was interesting that it's like, yeah, you can send her away. That's fine, because that's the way the law's written. But don't assume you're going to get her back later. That season of your life is gone. Don't try to recoup the life that you've missed, I guess, or whatever. However you want to look at it that way. Unless I'm reading it wrong. Miss Christman, here we go.
Okay, sorry, wouldn't unmute from it there.
Mm-hmm.
A couple different things. The instance that you're talking about, as far as the woman with some sort of indecency found in her. This is kind of like a mirror to the one where you have a recent bridegroom accusing his wife of being not a virgin, right? Only this is now after they've been married a while, and now he basically finds that she's been committing adultery. Okay, because that would basically cause an indecency, right? It would be considered indecent for her to be being adulterous. So when this is referring to that, it's not referring to her, acting in some crazy manner, like burning the biscuits, and he gets mad. This is about her doing something wrong. Or for instance, let's say if, he finds out that she's been secluded with another man. He tells her, hey, you see that guy over there? I don't want you to be secluded with this man. Maybe he's got a reputation. He's a local womanizer or something, just don't be with that guy. He finds that, people have been telling him, hey, seen her with that guy, that could lead up to this kind of thing, right? Now, in modern society, it's Jewish culture, it's interesting because you have situations where they have what they call chained women, which is just what you were talking about, Joe, where you have a woman who has essentially separated from her husband. She has asked him for a divorce, right? For whatever reason, maybe he was abusive, it just didn't work out, who knows what, right? Maybe he had an affair, right? He wasn't faithful in the marriage, but for whatever reason, he is refusing to give her a get, right? Which is a certificate of divorce. And so, it's become a big topic right now in, Jewish community as to how to resolve this, especially if the woman has really legitimate reason to separate and to remove herself from this man. But he's refusing to divorce her. because they are married within their own culture, within their own community, the same laws as far as divorce don't apply quite the same way, right? They follow the Torah. So it's a very unique situation, obviously one that can cause some issues as a result. Now, as far as the the pledges with the neighbors and the restoring of a coat, obviously it gets pretty darn cold in Israel sometimes, right? And if you don't give them back that coat, they might die in their sleep. And also, like you already rightly pointed out about the millstone, that's their livelihood. And it reminds me so much of the, I guess the legalese concerning the debtor here in this society and debtor's court, right? And sending debtors to jail. I think in more recent times they abolished sending them to jail, but they still can basically garner their wages, right? And especially if you got someone who's already poor, and then they had to take out loans to just sustain themselves and their family, and they can't pay them back now because maybe they lost their job or whatever happened, then putting in jail obviously is not going to resolve that problem, right? Or, garnishing their wages is not going to resolve that problem. So, in a way, you could say that even the way our system is currently set up is not acknowledging Torah, right? And it needs to be rectified. So those are things I wanted to point out as far as the section.
Awesome. Thank you, ma'am. All right, we're going to go ahead and read chapter 20. Well, we aren't going to read anything. Somebody's going to read 25 for us.
If the people have a dispute, seek its resolution in court, and the judge renders a decision in favor of the righteous one and condemning the wicked one. Then if the wicked one deserves to be flogged, the judge is to have him lie down and be flogged in his presence. The number of strikes is to be proportionate to his offense, but the maximum number is 40. He is not to exceed this. If he goes over this limit and beats him more than this, your brother will be humiliated. That word, yes, before your eyes. You are not to muzzle an ox when it is treading out the grain. If your brothers live together and one of them dies childless, his widow is not to marry someone unrelated to him. Her husband's brother is to go to her and perform the duties of a brother-in-law by marrying her. The first child she bears will succeed to the name of his dead brother, so that his name will not be eliminated from Israel. If the man does not wish to marry his brother's widow, then his brother's widow is to go up to the gate to the leaders and say, my brother-in-law refuses to raise up for his brother a name in Israel. He will not perform the duty of a husband's brother for me. The leaders of his town are to summon him and speak to him. If on appearing before them he continues to say, I do not want to marry her, then his brother's widow is to approach him in the presence of the leaders, pull his sandal off his foot, spit in his face, and say, this is what is done to the man who refuses to build up his brother's family. From this time on, his family is to be known in Israel as the family of the man who had his sandal pulled off. If men are fighting with each other and the wife of one comes up to help her husband get away from the man attacking him by grabbing the attacker's private parts with her hand, you are to cut off her hand. Show no pity. You are not to have in your pack two sets of weights, one heavier, the other lighter. You are not to have in your house two sets of measures, one big, the other small. You are to have a correct and fair weight and you are to have a correct and fair measure, so that you will prolong your days in the land Adonai your God is giving you. For all who do such things, all who deal dishonestly, are detestable to Adonai your God. Remember that Amalek did to you on the road as you were coming out of Egypt, how he met you by the road, attacked those in the rear, those who were exhausted and struggling behind. Then you are behind when you were tired and weary. He did not fear God. Therefore, when Adonai your God has given you rest from all your surrounding enemies in the land Adonai your God is giving you as your inheritance to possess, you are to blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Don't forget.
There it is. Don't forget.
And we're going to write it so you will remember it.
I'm not forgetting it still today, right? Yeah, I mean, again, this portion is covered all in Yeshua's story, with the 39 lashes that he received during the time of crucifixion. It's just interesting to see, like, Moses, Joshua, all the people reading, doing, seeing these things in their life and their culture at that time, not having almost any idea that these literal words are going to, apply to Yeshua. The grain, the 39 lashes, the curses the man hung on a tree. Like, they're just writing this stuff, and to them it's just day-to-day life.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, if there's grain over there, let somebody have it.
Yep.
Hey, if somebody's getting beat, don't beat them to death. Beat them so they understand, if that's the case, but don't beat them anything past that, like the humiliation we talked about, leaving them hanging up there all day. It's just funny to see how these things played out, like, verbatim. Like, God's like, I'm working through you, and you have no idea this literally is going to mean that, but you can't know that. None of these people were alive long enough to know what happened in the future. So they couldn't have, like, Moses didn't secretly tell Matthew, Mark, and Luke, like, hey, by the way, write this down. It's going to be important from Deuteronomy. They would have had to know their scripture and seen the parallels, which would have then only made the Old Testament even more valid. As Paul's saying, study the scriptures. Yeah, if you read this, you would understand. Oh, that's why he didn't get beat more than 39 times. Oh, that's why he was eating the grain. Like, these mental pictures would have been just popping off the whole time. They're like, I read this. I know this. This guy is doing verbatim words from the book.
Yep.
Mr. Kyle, what you got?
So there's a reference in there about, it refers to don't muzzle an ox while it's trekking the grain. I think there's a lot that can be said that's not said here. So there's a physical, literal aspect to this. Don't muzzle your actual ox when it's treading the grain. If it needs to, what's the purpose of muzzling it? So that it doesn't eat the grain. Well, if an ox needs sustenance, if it needs to pause a moment to eat, don't keep working it to death. Allow it to eat. Allow it to do what it needs to do so that it can perform well for you. I think there's a lot of attributes about this that we can roll over into our relationship with others, whether it be a servant or an employee, and also from a sense. Don't muzzle an ox while it's trying to eat, or while it's treading the grain. Well, we have scripture that references, and it's written in parabolic language about the sifting of the wheat and the tares, right? Well, there's a processing. There's a process that the grain must go through. That's to be up for use. to be able to make bread and all these other things, right? So again, I don't want to lead too much into this with my own imagination, but I can just see a beautiful analogy here of how even amongst our teachers and preachers and all that, we hold people to these high standards that there's no room for growth. But even our teachers and our preachers and pastors and all of us collectively, as we share the word, while the grain is being tread out here, we still have to eat. We still have to take in that word as we're helping others process. So I think there's a lot to this that we could dig into, but I just thought I'd share some of those angles.
Appreciate it, brother.
Yeah, Kyle, I was gonna say, I think too, one of the things I was thinking of with the muzzle and ox, it's like, don't heat, what's the word? Don't cause more problem. Don't make it a burden to try to work, right? The ox is already working. Why would you then put a muzzle on it? It's doing its job. Let it breathe, let it eat, let it, take care of business in a normal fashion. Don't, put a handicap on it essentially. That's the way that I was reading it, because we're called, again, it's the natural order of things. We're called to eat, we're called to work, we're called to be married, have children, take care of our brother's wife if the brother dies. All these things, don't kill the bird and the eggs, all that kind of stuff. It's all about taking care of people and taking care of life. Well, it's like, the heck you can do, like, that's like putting putting something over your face when you're trying to live normal life. It's a hindrance to the way we would do things and the way we would live. So that's the way that I would see that.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie to you, though. When we got to that part with the, and I'm going to let Crystalline go. She may have something on that part. But when it gets to the part where the lady's husband dies and her brother doesn't want anything to do with her,
Mm-hmm.
I got to lie to you. We both chuckled a little bit. I was like, let this be known. In all of Israel, this man here shall be called the house of him who had sandal removed. Da, 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 no. Guys walking around hobbling a little bit. What happened to you? Oh, I see what happened, brother. You the man with the sandal removed.
You see these blisters? I only had one pair.
I'll take you. Come on back. Let's do this. Anyway, Crystal, go ahead.
I just wanted to touch on a few things. Thank you, Jonathan, for bringing out the 40 lashes thing. Obviously, we did see that
Do what I can.
example. We love it. They usually refer to it as 39 plus 1. Don't ask me why. And the number 40 is very much, a repeated number in the Torah, right? So 40 years in the wilderness. Y'all can probably come up with all the 40, right? 40 days and night in the belly of the whale.
40 days of temptation. Yeah.
You said 40 days a night in the whale.
Lots of 40s, but usually it's interesting because 40s are oftentimes associated with punishment, right?
Yep, a period of testing.
Not always, but so it's just kind of another little thing there, and to me, you see over and over and over again this not degrading people, right? Not causing them to lose their dignity, because in the process, it's an affront to God, because they're His creation, right? So, and particularly for men, because they're meant to be in leadership, right? They're meant to be an example for everyone else. And so if you're degrading your leader, well, what are you following? What does that say about your community? So now if the man deserves to be degraded, if he's done something wrong, if he is degrading by his example, right? Then that's another story. But if they're doing the right thing, you need to degrade them, then that's wrong, right? So it goes to show you how much God takes that seriously, and how much society has changed, right? There was an extreme sensitivity to the degradation of people, right? And not to do that. That was wrong in God's economy. And so I think that's important for us to know. As far as muzzling the ox while it's threshing, I think, there's the analogy, and obviously Paul talks about that in his letters as it relates to ministry. I guess it depends on whether you choose to take this literally or more kind of as an analogy, for other things. Personally, I take it more literally, as far as, just don't muzzle the ox, right? And I think God, he goes over that as far as, treating employees fairly in another place in the Torah, as far as, paying your laborers for their wages, or else they will cry out to God, and God is going to get you, right? But at the same time, you don't starve your animals when they're doing work for you too, because that's your sustenance, is the bread, right? The bread of life. As far as the Levitical marriage and, someone being unwilling to perform the mother-in-law's duty, we saw that in the case of Ruth and Boaz, right? The first one refused because why? He was all excited about it when he heard about the land. The minute he heard about having a Moabitess, he was like, no, that's okay, guys, I'm out, right? And technically, she could have done that to him, right? Only that she wasn't yet a Jewess, right? She hadn't, as far as the officially been accepted into society, per se, right? At least within marriage. So that's where that whole context comes. However, they decide to accept her, and of course, then Boaz marries her, and the rest is history. So, but it would have been breaking a Torah prohibition because God doesn't change, right? So, we're talking legal terms here. So, you're looking at it. Deuteronomy is really court language. You're talking about judges making decisions, and they're not allowed to add or change. They're allowed to pervert. So, that's why interpretation is really, really important. We see that even with the Supreme Court today. So, now as far as the honest weight, this harkens back to the story of Yeshua, dealing with the money changers. Obviously, they were using dishonest weight. They were basically, what do we call it, price gouging people at the temple, And so it's important not to do that. And the whole Amalek thing always reminds me of the Alamo. It's basically the Amalek or the Amalekites are kind of like the Jewish Alamo, right? Never forget, always have a beef with these guys because God did. And why? Because of the way that they treated them in hospitality. And that's how important hospitality is to God. That's all I got to say.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I was going to say just really quick before we go on to Isaiah 54. One of the things we can do, I think a good point for us to study is when we read the words detestable or abomination, they're used interchangeably, but find all those things and be really careful not to do those things, right? Obviously it says dishonest scales and scales and weights, and that's considered an abomination or detestable depending on your version. And there's lots of things throughout Scripture, especially Old Testament, that will tell you what's an abomination and what's detestable. Out of all the words and all the things, we pull those out, make sure for sure not to do those, and then make sure to for sure keep the 10 Commandments. We're putting ourselves in the best alignment with the Father, and hopefully He guides us and shifts us according to the way He wants us to live as well. But man, how often are we getting caught up with something God calls an abomination? Like earlier, men wearing women's clothes and stuff like that, or here dishonest scales and weights, or the pig, right? We can pull out a few of those that are a little more obvious, and I think it's important for us to, pull those out, especially when it goes out of its way to tell you. It could have said, don't do it, it's bad. It's like, no, abomination. No, detestable. So I think it's one of the things that I've done. I've actually, Googled it many times of what does God say is abomination? And it's a lot more stuff than you think. It's not just the super duper bad stuff in our culture. It's the super duper bad stuff that God says. That what's bad to Him, not to us, right? In our world today, we could say wearing blue or wearing white after Labor Day or whatever kind of stuff. And God's like, I don't care about none of that. These are the things that I care about. Do the things that I care about. That's all I got to say about that. We're going to be going over to Isaiah 54. verses 1 through 10. So that is Isaiah. The chapter will be 54. The verse will be 1 through 10.
All right. Want me to read or you want to read?
You got it.
All right, I got
Okay,
this.
New
All right,
Testament.
all right. All right, verse 1 it says, Sing, O barren one, you who did not bear. Break forth into singing and cry aloud, you who have not been in labor. For the children of the deserted one are more than the children of the married woman, says Jehovah. Enlarge the place of your tent and let them stretch out the curtains of your dwelling. Spare not. Lengthen your cords and strengthen your stakes. For you shall break forth to the right and to the left, and your seed inherit the nations and make the deserted cities inhabited. Do not fear, for you shall not be put to shame, nor hurt. You shall not be humiliated, for the shame of your mouth you shall forget, and not remember the reproach of the widowhood anymore. For your Maker is your husband, Jehovah of hosts is his name, and the set apart one of Israel is your Redeemer. He is called the Elohim of all the earth. For Jehovah has called you like a woman forsaken and grieved in spirit, like a wife of youth when you were refused, declares your Elohim. For a little while I have forsaken you, but with great compassion I shall gather you. In an overflow of wrath I hid my face from you for a moment, but with everlasting loving commitment I shall have compassion on you, says Jehovah, your Redeemer. For this is the waters of Noah to me, and in that I have sworn that the waters of Noah would never again cover the earth, so have I sworn to not be wroth with you, nor to rebuke you. For though the mountains be removed and the hills be shaken, my loving commitment is not removed from you, nor is my covenant of peace shaken, says Jehovah, who has compassion on you.
Yeah, what is this like? This is considered, at least my chapter heading is an eternal covenant of peace. And I mean, I do think that, when we're reading about eternal covenant, one, all of his covenants are eternal once he establishes it. But also, when you look at some of the language here, maybe it's just me, I'm giving my interpretation, but it sounds a lot like a New Jerusalem. He's saying, when the mountains are laid low and the valleys raised up, we're making a place for this place to sit. He's enlarging the covering. He's expanding the tent pegs. All this language stuff. We're not doing this, right? We're not creating tents for hundreds and thousands and millions of people. Obviously, this is something that's happening, outside of our current ability to do. Enlarge, in verse 2, enlarge the place of your tent and let the curtains of your habitation be stretched out. And it depends on you how you view cosmology and all that kind of stuff. But this is very much language of firmament. This is language of, like a spreading out, covering, less of a vast emptiness of eternity space outward from where we live today. So I just thought that was interesting. A few things in there. And the last point I wanted to bring out was in verse 4, it says, fear not. And I just, literally just a couple of days ago, I was reading that thing that I saw way back when I was in middle school. It says, fear not is in the Bible 365 times. One time for every day, however calendar you use. You got all the days covered unless you have a really, really long year, but I don't know what to do about that.
Right.
360 some odd days is the normal year when you count from the sun going around the whole time. So, yeah, fear not, once for every day.
364 days with one for an extra measure so you don't forget.
Right. I wish there was 383 in there, but.
Yeah.
All right, Miss Sylvia?
Yeah, I agree. It is definitely talking about the New Jerusalem and the New Covenant. And I know a lot will say it's a renewed covenant. It's really not, because he points out and says, not like the covenant. Does it change his laws? No, they're eternal. They're forever. So those are always there. Mm-hmm. It's different in that we get resurrected bodies and we actually have the Torah written on our hearts. So sin's not going to be a problem for us anymore after that point, because our sins are removed. At this point, until then, the sins are covered by the high priest. And so when he's telling her also in this passage, at least on it might be a little longer than one I have, that he's returning her children to her. As we read Jude, the half the writings of Ezra that was removed from our scripture, points out how she was removed because of not her sin. Second Baruch, Jeremiah's scribe says, you don't think it's the city who sinned, do you? No, it was the children in her that made her desolate. You go to Isaiah 49, and he talks about her children being returned to her, the ones that made her desolate, now will rebuild her, being the descendants, those that are returning to Torah, returning to walking into obedience, and resurrected through the work of Christ. And it also says in Isaiah 49 that they will adorn her, their ornamentation. We look in Revelation and it says when she comes down like a bride adorned for her husband. But what's that adornment? Those are the resurrected saints that are tucked away in her on the day of the Lord. And so what is this? They always talk about make our garments ready, our bridal garments. What's adorning her? Well, what are those garments? Revelation tells us also it's the righteous deeds of the saints. So it's the unrighteous deeds of the saints prior, and even us ultimately, because we've all sinned and fallen short, that desolated her, that she's being restored. And that's where I think it's so, we kind of been taught for so long that we're the bride. Only in the essence is that we're the garment. We are the children. And all through Isaiah, this makes it very clear, and through other passages, that we are her children that are being restored, that are being tucked away in her. And it's very clear in Revelation 21 when he says, "Let me show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb." And the angel takes him and shows him the city. So it's her children that fill her. And we also read in the books at one point she was taken away. Again, Baruch it says that she was Enoch or Baruch. I have to go back and look now, I can't remember, but shows where she was removed, and it was at the time of the flood. So when in the passage in Isaiah where it's talking about, oh, you tossed with temper, comforted, he is speaking about Zion, who's been removed, the wife that's been sent away. He's restoring her back. That's all.
Awesome. That was a very good word there, man. Yeah, and I kind of follow up with that. I think, in verse 10, where, toward the end of that, after the mountains depart and the hills removed, it says, "My steadfast love shall not depart from you, and my covenant of peace shall not be removed." And it says the Lord who has compassion on you. And I think, when we look at Revelation, we look all throughout history, we always see people trying to claim peace and just display peace and, peace here and peace there. And it's all about, we're doing this for world peace and all this kind of stuff. And he's saying, who's this peace supposed to be coming from? It says the covenant of peace from the Father, and it says that shall not be removed. Whatever else we're looking for, whatever else we're trying to ascertain by our own power, authority, government, whatever the blue hat people, whatever they're trying to do, we're essentially only going to be able to get a small portion of what man is introducing and saying, hey, this peace that you're looking for, that's already in covenant, and that's from me. So when you turn your eyes to somebody, don't turn it to your local government. Don't turn it to your, people promising you this and promising you that. There's only one place you're going to get that from, and that's from the Father. And it's a beautiful promise, especially because he's saying, it shall not be removed. It's like, so even when we do dumb, when we're the cause of the problem, he's like, that's great. You guys are humans and you're doing what I wish you wouldn't do. But luckily for you, I'm a fair and just God, and I've promised this, I've made this covenant, and you can't get rid of it. It's coming whether you want it or not. And so, it's a warning against the evil in the world, but it's also a praise and a blessing for us, looking into a world of darkness and destruction. He's like, but don't forget, there's a back end to this. Don't forget, there's something coming bigger and better than what you maybe see right now. You might be going through a period of tribulation. That's a period of tribulation. We're talking about eternity. So don't forget what that is and how that looks. Miss Kristen, go ahead.
Yeah, one quick thing about the whole Old Covenant, New Covenant, New Testament, Old Testament. If you just Google, you'll find that the term Old Testament or Old Covenant actually came from who was considered a heretic called Marcion. Okay, he was the one that established a theory that there was an old covenant, and therefore God was mean then. He was in a bad mood, and that was why he had to punish people the way he did. But we've done away with that. We've got a new covenant, New Testament. And therefore, God's nice to us now. He likes us now. Right? This new God that we have. He's cool, right? He's not like that angry old God. So it's we got to be careful a little bit about going in that direction, because that's kind of what we're leading back to. And I promise you, it's legit. Go back and Google. Okay, Wikipedia has them. Marcion, spelled Marcion. As far as the term New Covenant that is referred to there, it's the same Hebrew word, if you go back and do your homework, that is used whenever describing the new moons, right? And the Rosh Chodesh, right? The head of the month, the new moon being sighted, and therefore okay, we're in this month now, right? And therefore we've got all these festivals coming up, for instance. It's not that you literally get a new moon every month, right? We all know that, right? In modern society, unless you're a flat earther, maybe, I don't know, we believe that we get the moon just revolves around us, right? And so we have these seasons of the moon, so to speak. It's new to us, right? Because we didn't see it for a while, and all of a sudden now we're starting to see it again, and it goes through its phases, but it doesn't mean that it's done away with, right? And we don't get a brand new moon. So that it's the same with the covenant, right? The same word is used. And obviously there is a progression that takes place. And we see that because of prophecy, right? There's all this prophecy of what's going to happen in that Old Testament, Old Covenant, of what's going to happen in the future. So it was already foretold. And so it's just playing out.
Hey, Ms. Chrislin, real quick, is there somewhere in here you saw, or did somebody say New Covenant? I just want to make sure that I didn't say that person or somebody else.
I did. I said New Covenant.
Oh, okay.
Because Jeremiah says, not like the covenant I made with your fathers.
Mm-hmm.
So that's new, and it's the word news. And even when you go and you're looking in through Revelation, when you're looking at, there's two different words used for new. One is neos, one is kainos. And neos is brand new, never having existed before. The law is eternal, the law stays. That's there. But the new covenant in this, where he says, I will write my words on your heart. It's not, the law's not written on our heart. Because no longer at that time will men have to teach one another. We're still teaching one another. We're still learning from one another.
Mm-hmm.
And that also includes, and that comes with the new body, the new resurrected body. That is a new covenant with the eternal law that's always been there. And with Yeshua as our high priest, it's not the same thing. It contains the same laws. It contains all of the same things that Yah requires of it, but it is new. And the renewed is only one of the definitions listed under that word. There's many, and that's why, like you said, context.
Mm-hmm.
It is new, which is exactly what Yeshua was doing when he said, this is the covenant with his blood, with his bread.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. At least to an extent, for sure, because each covenant that came into place was new when it was established. It wasn't that the old one was done away with. That version of new, as in like you throw the old one out, you bring the new one in. But it's new as in, okay, now Noah, now that there's been a flood, now this covenant of the rainbow and all that, this is now established today moving forward. It won't go away, but it was new because I didn't flood the earth before today, so we have had to have new. There's a continuation of new along the way, but it's like essentially the next chapter in the book. It's the new chapter, not all the other books thrown away. Now we have just a new one that we cover everything. So I think that's what you were saying. If you want to confirm, that would help me out just a little bit.
Are you talking to me?
Yeah, I was.
Oh yeah, the new one. We still contains this law because he says Torah is eternal.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
It doesn't end. It doesn't stop.
Right.
The covenant that we're under, we're still under the old covenant until we're resurrected and we have new bodies with hearts where his law is etched into our heart, where we no longer sin. And he said, and it says, there are qualifiers in there that we have to look for. And he says, no longer will we teach one another because everyone will know. Because
Right.
when he returns,
Yep.
Anybody left on this earth is going to know that he's here and who it is and what's going on. That we're still waiting to the fulfillment with. I think what gets oversight is we see some differences in how just the priesthood. In Hebrews 7, where it says, when there is a change in the priesthood, there is by necessity a change in the law. It's not change in the way that we always want to see change in our modern language. That change in the priesthood is the word metatithemi, which means a transfer from one to another. So it transferred from what? The human priest to the resurrected high priest Yeshua under Melchizedek.
Mhm.
And then the change in the necessity, then by necessity, there's a change in the law. The word change in the law is metathesis, which is a transfer from the earthly to the heavenly. And in Hebrews, it's all in reference to the Levitical priesthood, not the entire law.
Right.
But a lot have taken it out and want to say, oh, the whole law has changed. No, Hebrews, he's addressing the actual priesthood because the priesthood is now changed to the Messiah. And remember, the tabernacle we have here on earth was only a copy of the true tabernacle in the heavenlies. Yeshua was resurrected with a real tangible body, a spiritual body, but it was still a very real tangible body where he is carrying out priestly duties in a very real tangible tabernacle that we just cannot see. Because why? Because we're still in these fleshly bodies. So what we're waiting is that resurrection to be that perfection, to be perfected, to have that peace, to be made whole, so that we can have bodies that can see him in his fullness and will not be destroyed in the presence of his glory.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Ms. Chrisman, go ahead.
Well, I guess I think of it kind of like an onion, right? God creates an onion. He has a plan for the onion. He has a DNA in the onion that from the onion seed or however it starts, right? It's already etched into that onion. The whole thing's already played out from like generation to generation to generation. Onions are going to be onions, whether it's sweet onions, yellow onions, white onions, whatever kind, right? The minute you drop that seed in the ground, it starts to grow, right? In the beginning, it's a small little seedling, a sapling, whatever it is, right? And then eventually it produces its fruit, which is the actual onion itself. Okay, that onion has many layers, many layers, but from the outside, you just see this peel, right? You have to peel the outside to get to the actual fruit, which is the onion as we know it, right? And then even with that, you got to peel back another layer. Does that make the onion new? No. You got to keep peeling back, until you get to the finally to the inside of the onion. That's the way I see it, because God never changes, and He sees the end from the beginning. He is the Alpha and the Omega. So to me, we have to look at it from God's perspective. Just because something is new, quote unquote, to us, doesn't make it new to God. He's already got this whole thing mapped out from start to finish, if there even is a finish, right? And so having an eternal perspective, that kind of mindset helps in that sense. And yes, I can understand where Miss Sylvia is coming from. Yeah, to us it's new, but to God it's not. It's like, well, no, we prophesied this 5 chapters ago or whatever. It's just playing out. I knew this was coming, right? So I think that's where we can kind of conceive with one another, where we're looking at it from 2 different facets, right? We're looking at it from a human facet, living in the now, living in the present, with where we are, what we can see, and as it is unfolding in the timeline of history, right? And that becomes very, each generation has a different part. However, there is a lot to look forward to, just like we already know about, the third temple, the New Jerusalem is coming. We may or may not see it in our lifetime. However, we know it happened, right? So anyway, just something to think about, as far as when going through these different theories and theologies, that I did think it was important to point out about the whole, Marcion thing. It just, back then, every single church father, even though they subscribe to many other beliefs that we know are not true as far as, beliefs that have already been kind of wiped away, they all agreed to basically ban Marcion, So I think that's when it's a bit of a slippery slope we don't want to go back to. That's all.
Yeah, I agree with that. That we have to be careful of things that have crept into the church side over the years that have brought in misunderstanding. And so yeah, I can see both sides. I agree with Ruby or Sylvia. I was calling her Ruby. Sylvia as well. I think we're all almost saying the same thing, where it's like we have to go with everything with caution, right? So the meaning that someone else had behind it, the church anti-side is going to tell you that it's completely done away with. It's going to tell you that this is completely a new thing. The word to the point where it's almost like what you're talking about earlier was good cop, bad cop. We got bad cop, God in the Old Testament. Then we got good cop, Yeshua in the New Testament, and that's not the way it is. It's the same today, tomorrow, and forever. So anyway, some good points there, and we got to move on. We got to get to Matthew 24, and we're going to be in verses 29 through 42. Jonathan will be reading that for us today.
Yep.
Yohanan.
So the fun thing here, like I said, we're going to read Matthew 24. Obviously, the context here, because I really don't like how Torah portions just pick and choose what they want to read. So this is talking about the disciples are asking Jesus, how are we going to know what's going to be the signs of the times? Jesus left the temple and was going away when the disciples came to the point to point out to him that the building of the temple. But he answered them, you see these, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will be not one left upon another, and will it not be thrown down? So that's kind of the context of what we're talking about. Is the disciples are looking at him after they're leaving, saying, "Hey, you see this, right? You're literally looking at it. All right, I'm glad you're looking at it. So just so you know, not one of these stones is going to be left on another. You guys are focused on this earthly temple, as Miss Sylvia was talking about, and the one that matters, the one that counts, is going to be the one in heaven, the one that's being utilized and executed at the level of perfection." So that's the context of where we're starting, and we're going to go ahead and start reading in verse 29. So it says, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the cloud of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds and one end of heaven to another. From the fig tree, learn its lesson. From the fig tree, okay, yeah, that's what sounds weird. From the fig tree, learn its lesson. As soon as a branch becomes tender and puts out its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also, when you see all these things, you know that he is near, at the very gates. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But concerning that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angel in heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. For as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day when Noah entered the ark. And they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. Then two men will be in the field, one will be taken and one left. Two women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and one left. Therefore, stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. Right, that was it, 42?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Y'all got quiet.
So here's something I want to throw out there. Just
Don't know how to catch it.
you have to catch it. Yes, can't drop it. So would like some feedback on this one. It's just me literally off the top of my brain, which I'm not going to say a lot on that one, but we start talking about the sound of the great trumpet, and he'll send his messenger. So we realize this is the last trumpet, more likely. This is in Revelation. It talks, from one of the heavens to the other. It says, and learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branches already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that the summer is near. So you also, when you see all these, know that he is near at the doors. I wonder if this is a reference to, he's saying, hey, when you know the signs of the season, you see that the fig tree is giving up the figs, that this is referring to the feast days, the fall feast days that are coming. It's like, hey, you see this is taking place? Know that I'm right around the corner. After the summer, going into our fall feast days. That's what I believe a lot of us believe, that the return of Yeshua would be during to fulfill the fall feast days. I'm just wondering if that's even like a little hint towards them saying, hey, summer's come, fall is coming, and you know that I'm going to be near out the door. Just anybody's thoughts on that?
Yeah, when I read it, I mean, honestly, where I was coming from was the perspective of be diligent watchmen.
Right.
If it's saying you see the first little green sprout coming out, you know, that's not something where it's this big branch, it's been growing for 40 years. Everybody knows, oh, this is the oak at Mannery or some kind of story like that, right? No, hey, this is a little bitty sapling off a little bitty tree. You have to be diligent. You have to be watching. You have to be regular in that. And saying you're going to know when it's the time in the season. It doesn't say you're going to know today is June 13th. You're going to say, hey, it's time of summer, right? So when it's that summer, it's in season. And I think it goes on to say, well, you're not going to know the day or the hour. You got to watch. You got to be regular in this. Some people read that and say, oh, there's no way for us to know, so let's stop trying to figure it out. Let's just say, oh, God will handle it. He'll figure all stuff out later. No, it's saying, oh, you don't know. You're just not going to know exactly when, right? So if you're out there looking on a regular basis and you see, hey, things sprouting, I think it's time to start paying attention.
Right.
But if you have no idea what's going on, you're not even looking, you don't have any oil in your lamp, your lamp's not turned, all those verses that are telling us, be ready.
Right.
It doesn't say be at home chilling. It doesn't say don't worry about it. God's got it all under control. No one can know anyway. No, it doesn't say go around and start guessing either. 1988, 2012, 2023. They say don't be out here guessing, but look for the actual signs. Look for something physical, tangible, and something in reality where you can pull that story out. That's the way that I was reading it. It was you should be able to see, but you'll just know summer. You're not going to know the date. You're not going to know exactly when. You say, hey, oh man, it's summer. Oh man, we're in the season. It's wars and rumors of wars. Love and many will go cold. You're going to start to see this stuff unfold, and you're like, the ones who know. Everybody else is going to be just living like they were, marrying and eating, doing whatever they want. Right. You're like, no, I know it's time to get on the boat. Me and my house, we get on the boat. I know. You don't know. I know.
So that's why I think the fig tree is just a descriptor of, hey, when you see this thing, don't get so caught up in what you're doing and lose sight of, hey, you know that summer is here, and then what comes after summer, the fall. Then you're going to be the fall. You're going to be prepared, in your mind going, I need to prepare for these things, right? So I wish in which we could read it. We can do this ourselves. We don't have to follow this exactly, but I like to read past 42 a little bit. It says in verse 43, it says, "To know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. Because of this, be ready too, for the Son of Adam is coming in an hour that you do not expect him. Who then is a trustworthy and wise servant whom his master set over his household to give them food in season? Blessed is the servant whom his master, having come, shall find so doing. Truly I say to you that he shall set him over all his possessions. But if that evil servant says in his heart, my master is delaying his coming," it's like, well, Yeshua, they've been saying it for 2,000 years, he's coming back. People kind of like lose heart, or don't, they're not looking anymore. It says, I lost my place. Verse, it says, "But if the evil servant says in his heart, my master is delaying his coming, and begins to beat his fellow servants and to eat and drink with the drunkards, the master of that servant shall come on a day when he does not expect it, and in an hour he does not know, and shall cut him in two." Wow. "And appoint him his portion with the hypocrites. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth."
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah.
That sounds like that verse where it says, be ready in season and out of season.
Right.
It's like saying, well, just because now you know it's summer, good. Now you know it's close, but why aren't you ready? Why haven't you been thinking even out of season? Hey, it's been fall, winter, or spring. Hey, you should have taken that time to prepare to get ready. Why are you just now paying attention?
Yeah, because there's a preparation in your heart going into the Feast of Trumpets, Yom Kippur, going into Sukkot. There's a process there that the Father takes us through. He says, hey, be prepared. Because if you've been walking in this long enough, you kind of start to realize what these seasons, what these feast days are for.
Mm-hmm.
Right now we're at that point where we've heard it probably a lot right now. The King is in the field, and so we're at the point now. We're getting ready to come into the Feast of Trumpets, and then going into Yom Kippur, and then going. And of course, we all look forward to Sukkot. That's the easy one, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the one where like, hey, God even says, hey, by the way, I command you, have fun.
Right.
Drink your strong wine, your strong drink, and go and enjoy yourself. But I believe that these are the things that Yeshua is talking about, where he's like, hey, be prepared, like you just said, in season, out of season, but know the times that you're living in. Remember my feast days. Remember the purpose of these days. This is why he always said, for generations to come, don't stop doing these. These are a covenant. These are a command from yeah, exactly, that we will do these forever until the return of Adam.
The second Adam.
Right, right. And so anyway, I just thought that was interesting. Just seeing that partner he's putting the fig tree, knowing it's summer. What's after summer? The fall feast days. So don't forget.
Right.
Don't get caught up in what your own little world there, and forget where you're supposed to be at. So.
Yeah, and I think too, like we see, like in our modern world, so many people now have kind of taken the mentality of like, that stuff's not for us. Like Revelation, don't read that. That book's scary. Or like, well, we're going to be taken up before all that happens anyway. We don't need to know any of this stuff. And Jesus is literally telling you the exact opposite. Look, watch, prepare, think, pay attention, read, figure it out, understand. The disciples are asking, what can we do to understand? He tells them stuff to do. He doesn't say, just kind of sit around, and when it happens, it happens. You won't know anyway. I'm going to be a thief in the night. It's going to be a surprise. Psych, gotcha, right? It doesn't seem like that's going to be the case. It seems like there's going to be some times, there's going to be some events, there's going to be some things that we should be aware of, and how much more, if we truly care about those in our community, our family, our children, why wouldn't we want to know? If we can get within, let's say we get within a 30-day period, a 90-day period, at least we would have some idea, right? If we can bring some people in, if we can store up a food or two, right? I'm not even saying what kind of food, just a food, a water, right? Then you're like, hey, that's one more positive thing. But what I kind of was looking at is we have the opposite problem in our world today. So we are supposed to be looking. Yeshua tells us what to look for and why to be looking, but we have the opposite problem where people are looking at it for everything. Everything's a sign. Everybody's a prophet. Everything's prophecy. Some water dries up somewhere, and they're like, oh, see, prophecy. Oh, some pastor said this word, prophecy. And you're like, well, maybe not. Let's look what Jesus said. Let's look what Yeshua said. And like same thing, like when they're saying, oh, we found the Messiah. He's over there. He's out in the desert. He's here. He's there. He's like, what are you guys doing? Why are you looking anywhere? I already told you I'm coming out the clouds. So as long as your neck is broken and you're looking straight up in the sky, maybe you'll find me. But if you're looking around all over the place, I'm not there. I'm not going to be here, there, or anywhere. Like Dr. Seuss book, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to be in any of those places. And it's given us, it's given, for me at least, it's given us very, very super duper easy, clear things to look for. Not exact, but clear things to look for. Right at the beginning, immediately after tribulation. So you are going to be in tribulation. That's what it starts off with. So that whole pre-trib thing kind of goes out the window a little bit, depending on how you guys look at it, just based on that verse. Immediately after, so it already happened. Then the sun will be darkened. That should be a fairly obvious sign, right? The world's gonna be like, oh, it's aliens. Oh, it's a lunar thing. Oh, it's the calcium junk that we're putting up in the atmosphere with chemtrails. Whatever excuse they're gonna find, there's gonna be a time when the sun's gonna be dark. Then it says, and the moon will not give its light. First, the moon has its light, apparently, because it's not gonna give it. But it's also, so now we're gonna have dark sun, dark moon, right? Two bad things or signs in the sky. So there's going to be things that if we are looking even a little bit, we should be able to see. That's the way I'm reading it. If you know that the sun should be up today and it's not up today, start using the noodle. Look to the clouds. The Son of Man might be coming back. We might see some stuff rolling back. We might see some angels, some trumpets. There's some stuff happening. And I think so many times we read this and we're just like, metaphor. Oh yeah, like for instance, I know I'm talking a little bit longer. When Yeshua was crucified, right, and it said it was dark. It was midday and it was dark. All of them people there should be like, this is not normal. This does not happen. How in the world is it 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock, somewhere in the daytime? Again, how you count time, it says the 6th hour or the 9th hour from the morning when the day started. Then it would have been, you would have had to go to that time frame and know that it was midday. It wasn't like it was already at night and then the sun didn't show, because that wouldn't make any sense. Who cares, right? It's already dark. It was clearly bright as all get out, and then it got dark. He's given us very clear signs in the sky of when big major events are happening. The Messiah is giving up his life. They didn't kill him. He gave up his life, preparing himself for resurrection. It got dark. Same thing here. Yeshua was about to come back, right? He left on dark. He's coming back on dark, right? He's giving us super duper clear signs, and it's telling us so much more that we need to know about the time, when day starts, how the sun and the moon work, which one has light, which one does. There's so many details in like 3 little verses, so I just been eating that up.
Appreciate you. Yeah, it just makes me wonder too, with going back to the time that he's telling this to his boys. I mean, how much of this are they like, what and what and what? So nothing good here.
Mhm. Well,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, one more thing, but because you mentioned it, that was exactly what I was going to think about. Is he's talking to the disciples, the apostles, the ones he's called out. He's saying, "Hey, you guys are getting some inside information."
Yep.
Now, again, if they were unlearned men, or if they wanted to take stuff out of context, which they wouldn't have, but if they wanted to, it did get dark when he was crucified. They were like, "Oh, this is he's coming back." Oh, but there was more signs, right? If they were unlearned, if they would have taken out, see, the sun got dark, so you should be coming back today. You just died, but you're coming back. And he's like, dude, that's why I gave you the moon part and the stars part and the shaking and all this other stuff.
Right.
If you didn't see those things, then now you know kind of contextually what's going on. And I think that's why the two events were slightly different. Because if they were exactly the same, that's confusing. They weren't confused. They were like, okay, well, no, this was special, but this wasn't the one he told us to look out for. He told us to look for three things, not one thing, and only one thing's happening.
Very good. Chrislyn?
Yeah, one thing, and trigger warning, you were commenting about, how these portions are set out as far as the parashas, right, or parashot. At least the parts from the Torah itself, as well as the rest of the Tanakh, obviously not anything in the Brit Hadashah, were originally set out, I hate to say it, the rabbis. They're the ones that made it like that. It wasn't the Levites. They're the ones that made it like that because of the fact that they were in exile at the time, and it was a means of ensuring that the people would routinely go through Torah throughout the year, right? Because of the fact that they were now amongst the Gentiles, right? In these pagan nations that would obviously be trying to keep them from doing so. We saw many examples of that in the story of Maccabees and so on and so on. The portions that are added from the Brit Hadashah, you'll notice whether it be, for instance, like UMJC will have different ones from the MJAA or different congregations sometimes fluctuate on those. And obviously the different quote Jewish or Hebrew roots translations will sometimes change around the Brit Hadashah references because there's many ways that you can line things up and connect things. But the Torah portion and usually a portion from the prophets or writings and so on is already preset. So anyway, just a little bit of history there and how that came to be. You can always Google it. Don't take my word for it. That is actually where we get them from. And Yeshua obviously did not say, hey, this is terrible. We shouldn't do this. Why? Because we see from the time whenever he came and read from Isaiah about himself, right? He read from that day's Torah portion, right? The parashot that was already set for that day. And he was fulfilling prophecy by reading from it that day, right? And so that kind of works with what, the admonishment he's giving his Talmudim here. There's a time and there's a season for everything. Just like within an agrarian culture, which obviously Israel and all of that whole time period would have been like, right? And Hebrew thinking is very cyclical. It's not linear like Greek, okay? So, there's seasons to everything. Therefore, when you're looking for these signs, that's why it goes that way. And it's like that onion I talked about. The other thing I wanted to point out was how important Shabbat was in the honoring of Shabbat, to the point where, he says that, you should basically pray that this kind of stuff doesn't happen on a feast day or Shabbat. And women, pray that you're not pregnant, because stuff's going to be going down and you're going to need to make a runner, But if it's Shabbat, you're not allowed. So, you're kind of stuck. And we saw this happen as well in history with the different attacks that came upon the people during those days, right? From the Greeks to the Romans and so on. So it, that was a very literal thing back then. They didn't take it lightly. To the point where in Josephus, during one of the attacks of one of the townships, further out, there was a guy who was even just a total con artist, right? Who came into his town to seek its protection from the Romans because they were chasing him down. There was a head of a battalion or whatever from Rome that came after him, and he basically sent messengers to the guy and said, "Hey, look, we're about to hit Shabbat. Can we hold off for the day, and then we'll fight you again, day after tomorrow?" And the guy actually honored it, right? Because in other places they honor Jewish culture and tradition, right? But the guy, of course, being a thug and not really being observant, used it as an opportunity to run away. But it just goes to show you how, they were even able to convince their enemies to honor that, right, to some degree or another, right? Even though some of them didn't just attack them. So I just think it's cool to see how we read these things in scripture and then we see it played out in history. And it just goes to show you how true God's word is. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, awesome. And I just wanted to jump in super quick, just to make sure, maybe, like I said, maybe you have a contextual point that I'm missing out of the word. So I'll just jump into Luke 4 real quick. It says, "And he came to Nazareth where he had been brought up, and was his custom. He went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and he stood up and read, and he stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it is written, and he read the quote from Isaiah, and he rolled up the scroll and gave it back to the attendant and sat down." So I just want to make sure that you're saying that those words are literally saying they had Torah portions then, and that was the exact portion that he should have been reading on that day for that week.
Yes, that is exactly what I'm saying.
Okay.
Because the Torah portions would have been set up around the time of Babylonian exile. And that happened long before Yeshua came, right? So you had the Babylonian exile, you had the Syrian exile of the Israelites, the northern kingdom. Then you had the Babylonian exile of the Judean kingdom, the southern kingdom, right? And then later on, you have the Greek Empire and Roman Empire. Yeshua came around during the Roman Empire, right? So that would have already well been established before Yeshua came, right? And so it's so cool how God just drops Yeshua into history at that moment, at that right moment. And then right after he says that, he goes and sits in the quote seat of Moses, which is a literal seat in every synagogue, right? And the person who is basically, the established leader who's teaching the Torah.
Hey, Miss Kristen, right? Where does it say he sat in the seat of Moses?
Basically, hold on. We gotta go to that reference.
I mean, I can read it.
Do you have it pulled up?
Yeah, I can read it real quick. It says, "And he rolled up the scroll and gave it back to the attendant and sat down, and all the eyes in the synagogue were fixed on him."
It depends on your translation. Some of them actually, say that he sat in the seat of Moses, essentially. But basically, there was a seat in every synagogue called the seat of Moses. It was meant to be as a sign of authority as far as theologically, right? When they're teaching doctrine from the Torah, right? And this is the reason why Yeshua says to his Talmudim later on, basically, obviously, certain Pharisees, right? Watch what they say, but don't do what they do, right? Because they're bending the rules for themselves, so to speak. However, they sit in the seat of Moses, and therefore they have the authority. So in other words, these are the people who are the heads of the synagogue. These are the people who are the teachers, right? And therefore, if they're teaching exactly from the Torah, that is God's word. Those are God's laws. However, if they're going outside of that and it's breaking Torah, it's going against what God has said to do, then don't do as they do. Does that make sense? So there's a clear delineation in that. And why? Because they've been given the authority to do so, right? God respects leadership, right? He does. He just does. That's why even in the case of an unjust judge, right, sometimes he'll say, just roll with it and I'll deal with it myself, right? I will make sure justice is served. If they screw it up, I'm going to take care of it.
You want to read it? 23:2, you said?
Yeah, Matthew 23:2 is where it mentions the seat of Moses.
So Matthew 23:2, and Jesus said to the crowd and to his disciples, the scribes and the Pharisees. Oh, yeah, the scribes and the Pharisees sat on the seat of Moses. Yeah, but she was saying that Jesus was sitting on the seat of Moses.
Yeah, well, I can't. That the seat that it's referring to is the one that would be in the synagogue where they would sit and proclaim stuff from Scripture. Well, I have not found that, but it's stuff.
Oh, it said he sat down. I mean, everybody was sitting down, right?
Well, yeah.
I don't know. But we can look into it further. Fun area for discussion. If we, Ms. Kristen, if you do find that written down somewhere like in the words, then I would love to see that so I can get smart.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, man. Anything else in chapter 24? We got about 5 minutes. Last comments, last points. Make them quick, and then we can pray ourselves out.
Well, I think somebody had said earlier was questioning about why an illegitimate child could not be accepted into the assembly. I mean, obviously we read in the Torah how that was supposed to be done. I think it's more about not being allowed into like temple worship. Do you see what I'm saying? Because of the, I mean, if a Levite who has a deformity can't even come in, right? It's seen as something similar. Although there is a bit of a story of redemption in one of the judges' stories. The guy's name is like yes something or other. I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly. But basically, he was the product of a man who was already married and a prostitute. And as a result, his siblings rejected him, and they refused to give him a share in their inheritance when the father passed. And so he had to go out and make a livelihood for himself. And he basically became like kind of a warlord, and to the point where the brothers got in trouble. They were being attacked by someone else. And they actually had to come and say, hey, bro, can you come defend us? Because we're getting attacked. He's like, well, you just cut me off from the family. You cut me off from the inheritance. Like, what gives, right? And they're like, well, yeah, because basically you were, mom's there, but you know what, we need you now. So we'll make you our leader if, and of course that comes with all the goods, if you come, defeat our enemies for us, which he ends up doing. This is the same guy who later on, after he wins, he promises God that if I win this battle, I'll give you the first thing that comes out to meet you from my house. And unfortunately that ends up being his daughter, right? But that's a perfect example of, a mom's there situation, right? Just to clarify that question from earlier that didn't get answered.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
All right, so last word here. Verse 42 says, therefore, stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. So I just encourage you guys all to stay awake, read your scriptures, stay in prayer, honor the Father and what he says and what the things his son did as an example for us to live by. Read your word diligently, read the words plainly, interpret them as they're stated, literal when possible. And then when it tells you it's metaphor, allegory, then that's the case as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to pray ourselves out, and then we'll be ready for service coming up here at 5:30. So just ask you guys all join us over there if you like. We'll be having a fun sermon.
We'll probably post again, and we'll do our praise and worship here, and then we'll have the post up probably a little after 6 o'clock is when it'll probably be on YouTube. So
so be ready for that link to get sent out, or the
be
live
prepared.
notification. Right, be ready in season and out of season. The next hour of season.
Yep.
Don't use Lowry's because that wouldn't make sense. All right, so let's go ahead and pray. Duo, thank you so much for who you are. Thank you so much for the scripture readings today. I do thank you for whatever portion that we're reading and whatever section of scripture reading that those are your words that you breathed into them. And while it's less important on what we read, it's that we read. So I'm just thank you so much that we are digging, that we are reading, that you show up each and every time that we open your word. There are 2 or more of us are gathered, and there are so many more online. So I just thank you for this being a resource. For those that are in and out of our community, I pray for those in our community that we can join together more often. For those outside of our community, that they have somewhere that they can jump into. So I just thank you for all that you're doing. For Pastor Joe is setting up his house for us to study his word. And ultimately, Lord, for you, the Father, giving us the heart, the desire, and the drive to seek these things out, to search you more and more. And just that we continue to pray for wisdom and that you'll give it. So I just pray for the service coming up, that your will be done, that your words be spoken, and that we all leave edified as a body, that we grow, that we take this flame that we've gathered here today and send it out to the world with us, take it with us, display it brightly as much and as often as possible. Praise things in your son's holy name, Yeshua. Amen.
Amen. Thank you guys for joining us online via Facebook, YouTube, and Zoom. God bless you. We'll see you next time.
Peace. You got it in.